The Change Game, a novel about how to deal with difficult people. Written by Quinn Price. Narrated by Mark Silverberg. Chapter 1. The honeymoon is over. Marcus Winters knew a losing game when he saw one. He'd analyzed enough strategies, calculated enough odds, and orchestrated enough victorious comebacks to recognize when the rules had been subtly, irrevocably changed. What he couldn't figure out was when exactly it had happened, or what the new rules were. He positioned the last kettle-cooked potato chips into a perfect arc around the ceramic bowl's edge, completing the 6 sections of flavors. No different than arranging game pieces on a board. Everything in its place, everything accounted for. This type of meticulous planning had earned him a management promotion at 32. His wife of 7 weeks had come to despise this type of predictability. The clock on the microwave read 7:42 p.m. 18 minutes until his friends would arrive, the same 3 who'd been coming to Thursday game night since their college days, long before Vanessa had entered the picture. Alex, who always arrived early. Priya, who always brought dessert. James and Sophia, the married couple who'd shown him what partnership was supposed to look like. Marcus glanced toward the bedroom door, still firmly closed. Vanessa had disappeared inside an hour ago to freshen up, claiming exhaustion from her day as a PR consultant. The same woman who, during their courtship, had enthusiastically joined these gatherings and even suggested expanding the group with her friends. It had been 7 days since they'd returned from their honeymoon in Bali. 7 days of subtle accusations, unexpected complaints, and a growing sense that he'd somehow married a stranger. The bath mat became unsuitable because it was not made of pure cotton. His maple breakfast sausages were now offensive. The paint color she'd helped choose was abruptly depressing. When he'd asked why these things hadn't bothered her during their 2 years together before marriage, her answer was disturbing and bewildering. "You are so dominant. I couldn't express my real feelings until now." Marcus, whose shoulders had a permanent slight hunch from a lifetime of avoiding conflict, who used self-deprecating humor to deflect criticism, who would rather absorb pain than cause it. Dominant? It was like being accused of stealing the world's last cookie when your taste buds have sworn a blood oath against sugar. His phone buzzed. Alex's text, "On my way. Bringing that new strategy game I told you about." Marcus felt a tiny spark of anticipation, then glanced again at the bedroom door. The silence from behind it was deafening. Vanessa? He hated the slight waver in his voice. "People will be here soon. Are you coming out?" The door opened and she emerged, not in the outfit he'd expected, but in yoga pants and one of his old college t-shirts. Her face was scrubbed clean, and her hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail. "I already told you I'm not feeling up to games tonight," she said, brushing past him toward the refrigerator. "I had that disaster meeting with the Reynolds account today. You remember? The one I told you about this morning?" He didn't remember. Like a growing number of her references to previous conversations, this one seemed to exist in a parallel universe where different words had been exchanged. But nodding was easier than denial, so he nodded. "Right, of course. I just thought maybe you'd changed your mind since you were getting ready." Vanessa rolled her eyes as she poured a generous glass of Cabernet. "I wasn't getting ready. I was taking a moment for myself after a hellish day while you obsessed over potato chip arrangements." The doorbell rang. Marcus checked his watch. 7:51 p.m. Alex was early as usual. "I'll get it," he said, grateful for the escape. But it wasn't Alex. Priya stood at the door, balancing a bottle of wine and a white bakery box. "I brought dessert," she announced with a warm smile. "Where's the newlywed bride?" "In the kitchen," Marcus replied, his voice low. "Fair warning, she's had a rough day." Priya's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded and headed toward the kitchen. "Vanessa, how was Bali? We need to hear everything." By 8:10, the entire crew had assembled. James and Sophia arrived with a potted peace lily as a welcome back to reality gift. Vanessa accepted it with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, then announced she wouldn't be joining them for games. "You guys go ahead," she said, waving her hand dismissively while refilling her wine glass. "I'm just going to relax in the bedroom. Pretend I'm not even here." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "Are you sure? We're starting with Settlers of Catan. You love that one." "I said I'm not playing, Marcus." The edge in her voice was unmistakable, like a blade wrapped in silk. An uncomfortable silence descended. Alex cleared his throat. "No problem. Maybe next time when you're feeling better." Marcus nodded, desperate to salvage the evening. "Let's set up in the dining room." As the others moved away, Vanessa suddenly caught his arm, her fingers digging in slightly too hard. Her previously cold eyes widened with vulnerability. "Don't be mad at me," she whispered. "I just need some me time tonight." The shift was so abrupt that Marcus felt momentarily disoriented. "I'm not mad," he assured her, guilt instantly replacing his frustration. "Take all the time you need." Her smile appeared like a light switched on. "You're the best." She kissed his cheek and disappeared into the bedroom. They were midway through the first game when the bedroom door opened again. Vanessa emerged transformed, hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless, wearing the knee-length navy dress she'd worn to their rehearsal dinner, the dress that cost more than his entire suit. "Change my mind," she announced brightly. "Who's winning?" Marcus felt a rush of bewilderment, relief, and happiness. "We just started. I can deal you in next round." "Actually," Vanessa said, checking her phone with studied casualness, "I invited Lindsay and Mark to join us. They should be here any minute. They've never played these kinds of games before, but I thought it would be fun to teach them." Marcus felt the first real stirrings of anger. "Lindsay and Mark? From your office?" "Bingo, farm boy," Vanessa nodded, moving toward the door as the bell rang. "Put on your happy faces, people." What followed was a methodical dismantling of everything game night was supposed to be. Lindsay, Vanessa's boss, Marcus soon learned, and her husband Mark showed zero interest in learning strategic board games. Vanessa quickly suggested charades instead, a game where her theatrical talents could dominate. The tournament bracket Marcus had carefully prepared was casually set aside like his feelings. By 10:30, game night had been entirely hijacked. It was now a professional networking event with Vanessa at its center, regaling everyone with honeymoon stories that seemed strangely exaggerated as if describing a trip Marcus hadn't taken. When he attempted to steer the conversation back to games, Vanessa gave him a look so sharp it severed his sentence mid-word. At midnight, Lindsay and Mark finally departed, with Marcus's increasingly uncomfortable friends making quick exits behind them. Alone in the kitchen, Marcus loaded the dishwasher, and the untouched chips in their perfect arrangement are now a sad metaphor for his carefully constructed evening. "Why are you slamming the dishes?" Vanessa asked from the doorway. "I'm not," he replied, though he realized his movements had grown more forceful. "You're obviously angry," she said, crossing her arms. "Just say what you're thinking instead of being passive-aggressive." Can I be dominant and passive-aggressive? Not sure how that works. A look of confusion shot across Vanessa's face to mark the moment's awkwardness. Marcus, feeling the tension, took a deep breath and decided to be direct. "Look, I wish you had told me you were inviting people from your work. Game night is usually just us and my friends." "Oh my God!" Vanessa threw up her hands. "I can't believe you're being like this. I finally felt good enough to socialize after my horrible day, and you're mad at me for it." "I'm not mad that you socialized. And Lindsay is not just people from work. She's my boss, Marcus. My boss who determines my entire future at the company. But sure, your precious game night traditions are more important than my career." Marcus felt himself shrinking, the familiar pattern taking hold. That's not what I meant. Of course, your career is important. Then why are you attacking me right now? Her voice took on a slight quaver, and her eyes suddenly glistened with tears that appeared with suspicious timing. I'm not attacking you. You know what? I don't need this. Vanessa's voice hardened again, the almost tears vanishing as quickly as they had materialized. I spent all day managing a crisis at work, made an effort to involve important people in my life in your game night, and this is the thanks I get? If this is how you're going to be now that we're married, I'm not sure what I signed up for. The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Vanessa, come on, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that. She turned away, heading toward the bedroom. You need to figure out what kind of man you want to be, Marcus, because this weak, whining version isn't what I married. The bedroom door closed with a deliberate quietness, somehow more final than a slam would have been, leaving Marcus alone in the kitchen. He looked down and realized he was still clutching game pieces, tiny wooden houses from Settlers of Catan. In the game, these represented settlements, places of safety and growth. Places nothing like his home felt now. With mechanical precision, he placed each piece in its designated compartment within the box. Everything was in its proper place, just as he'd always done, just as he'd always been. Marcus Winters was a master of games with clear rules and defined objectives. Given enough information, he could analyze patterns, anticipate opponents' moves, and develop winning strategies. But as he finished cleaning up, a cold certainty settled in his stomach. He was playing by one set of rules while Vanessa operated according to another entirely. And in this chess match of hearts, where his happiness hung in the balance like a king in check, he floundered several strategic moves behind, staring at the board with no viable path to victory. Chapter 2. Leading Change. Human behavior follows patterns as predictable as any board game. If only you could see all the pieces at once. Marcus Winters arrived at Horizon Technologies at precisely 6:13 a.m., a full 47 minutes before the building typically stirred to life. After the battlefield, his home had become an empty office that felt like a sanctuary. The silence welcomed him, free of emotional landmines and shifting expectations. He unrolled his diagrams across the conference room wall with surgical precision, smoothing each corner until they hung perfectly aligned, flowcharts coded in blue, timelines in red, and responsibility matrices in green. In his mind, these carefully crafted visuals would transform his brilliant but chaotic team into the well-oiled machine that his boss, Janet, expected. 4 months until Prisma's launch. 4 months to salvage what was quickly becoming a slow-motion train wreck. If only humans operated with the predictable logic of the software they created. Early bird gets the corporate worm, huh? Marcus turned to find Zach Delgado slouched against the doorframe. The company's most brilliant developer looked like he'd been tumble-dried in his clothes, hair standing at impossible angles, yesterday's t-shirt bearing a faded 404 sleep not found joke, eyes simultaneously alert and exhausted. He was a coding savant with an allergic reaction to structure. Just setting up, Marcus replied, instinctively smoothing an invisible wrinkle from the nearest diagram. You're here early, too. Zach dropped into a chair and propped his sneakered feet on the polished conference table. Never left. Got caught up solving that memory leak issue in the rendering engine. His bloodshot eyes narrowed at the wall of diagrams. Please tell me those aren't process charts. They're not just charts, Marcus began, feeling that familiar tightness in his chest, the same defensive tension he'd felt last night with Vanessa. It's a comprehensive team and project management system designed to suck the creative life out of us? Zach's interruption carried the casual brutality of someone who'd never bothered with social filters. To help us deliver on time, Marcus finished, ignoring the barb. The Prisma launch is in 4 months, and we're behind schedule on 6 key components. Zach waved a dismissive hand through the air. Schedules are fiction as soon as they're written. I'll get it done. I always do. Yes, usually at 3 a.m. the day before the deadline, with code no one else can understand or modify. It's called genius, Marcus. Look it up. Before Marcus could respond, Maya Okafor entered the room, her arrival as precisely calibrated as her appearance. Everything about Maya was exacting. Her posture was military straight, her charcoal suit was wrinkle-free, and her movements were economical. She placed her laptop at a perfect right angle to the table edge, then scanned the diagrams with the critical eye of someone who'd spent a career hunting microscopic flaws. I see we're implementing another process about our process, she observed, her tone neutral but her meaning clear. It's a system to help us deliver Prisma on time, Marcus explained, already feeling his carefully prepared pitch eroding. I'd value your input on the quality assurance metrics. Maya's perfectly arched eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. Code quality, she declared, refuses the handcuffs of timelines and the straitjacket of systems. But sure, I'll hear you out. By 9:28, the entire team had assembled, each carrying their distinct brand of resistance-like armor. Jen Williams sat at the far end, headphones still in place, eyes locked on her tablet, physically present but mentally elsewhere as she'd been for the past 5 years at Horizon. Ravi Patel had arrived bearing an extra coffee for Marcus, a peacekeeping gesture that somehow felt like added pressure. Tyler Chase strode in last, his designer glasses and carefully disheveled hair, making him look like he'd stepped out of a Silicon Valley fashion shoot rather than a coding terminal. Let's get started, Marcus began, feeling his pulse quicken. As you all know, Janet is concerned about our Prisma timeline. We've missed 3 milestones, and marketing has already begun their campaign based on our original launch date. Marketing always jumps the gun, Zach muttered. Not our problem. Marcus took a steadying breath. Actually, it is our problem. Prisma is the company's flagship product for the year. The CEO is personally invested in its success, which means Janet is feeling the pressure, which means we're about to get our creativity strangled by checkboxes, Tyler interjected, leaning back with practiced indifference as if the conversation were happening several kilometers beneath his concern. No, Marcus said, injecting his voice with a firmness he didn't entirely feel. It means we need to work smarter. That's why I've developed this team and project management system. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus outlined his vision, a transparent tracking system where each component's progress would be visible to all teams, dependencies mapped, bottlenecks identified early, and accountability built into every handoff. He'd spent weeks developing it, incorporating best practices while trying to accommodate the team's unique working styles. The key difference from our previous approach, he explained, pointing to a color-coded section of his diagram, is that this system doesn't just track what we do, but how we interact with other departments. Each handoff point has clear expectations and a verification process. The silence that followed what wasn't the impressed pause he'd hoped for. It was the calculated stillness of a jury that had reached its verdict before the defense had finished presenting. Zach broke it first. So basically, you want us to stop doing actual work to update tracking systems about the work we're supposedly doing? That's not... I'm concerned about these quality gates, Maya interrupted, laptop open, fingers already typing what appeared to be a detailed critique. The timeframes you've allocated for testing are insufficient for thorough validation. We'll ship defects if we do what you're proposing. The timeframes are flexible within... I think what everyone's trying to say, Ravi jumped in with a placating smile that didn't reach his eyes, is that while the system looks great in theory, we might need to adjust it to our team's workflow. Maybe I could help implement it gradually? Marcus recognized Ravi's attempt at peacemaking, a well-intentioned intervention that would inevitably water down the system until it became as ineffective as their current approach. Before he could respond, Jen removed one earbud to acknowledge the meeting's existence. Will this new system require additional meetings? Because my productivity drops by approximately 27% for every hour spent in meetings rather than coding. There would be brief daily stand-ups and... This approach ignores the creative process entirely, Tyler said, scrolling through his phone as if the conversation were a mildly interesting podcast playing in the background. Innovation doesn't follow neat little boxes and timelines. The best features I've developed came from unfettered exploration, not checking items off a list. Marcus scanned the table, recognizing the choreography of this resistance dance. Each team member responded exactly as their personality dictated. Zach with rebellious dismissal, Maya with perfectionist concern, Ravi with conflict-avoiding compromise, Jen with passive resistance, and Tyler with creative superiority. These were the same responses he'd received to every change he'd attempted since his promotion 3 months ago. Different proposals, identical reactions. It was as predictable as a board game where each player had only one permitted move. I understand everyone's concerns, Marcus said, fighting to keep his voice even. But the reality is that our current approach isn't working. We've missed deadlines and created integration problems with other teams, and Janet is starting to question whether we can deliver Prisma at all. That got their attention. At Horizon Technologies, the unspoken rule was simple: deliver or die. Teams that failed to produce were disbanded, their projects reassigned, their members redistributed throughout the company, or worse, escorted to the exit. So, we have 2 choices, Marcus continued, seizing the rare moment of focused attention. We can continue as we are and likely fail, or we can try a new approach that might feel uncomfortable but gives us a fighting chance. A sharp knock at the conference room door interrupted the tense silence. Janet Kozlowski, Director of Product Development, stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable behind her trademark red-framed glasses. Marcus, could I see you for a moment? The team exchanged glances as Marcus followed Janet into the hallway, closing the door behind him. How's it going in there? Janet asked, nodding toward the conference room. They're resistant, Marcus admitted, but I think they're starting to understand the stakes and we'll get there eventually. Janet studied him for a moment, her head tilting slightly. You know what your real job is, don't you, Marcus? He blinked, caught off guard by the question. To deliver Prisma on time? No, she said, shaking her head. Your job is to lead change, to change behavior. That's what leadership is. The product is just the outcome. Your actual task is to transform how 5 brilliant, difficult people work together and with other teams. Marcus absorbed this, realizing she was right. His job wasn't about project management systems or timelines, those were just tools. His real challenge was leading behavioral change. But how? The reason I promoted you, Janet continued, is that you understand both the technical and human sides. Most leaders excel at one or the other, but changing behavior requires both. They're not making it easy, Marcus said, glancing back at the conference room. Of course not, Janet replied with a small smile. People often resist change, especially people who've succeeded by following their own rules. Your team members are all used to being the smartest person in the room, working their own way. Now they need to be the smartest team in the building, working together. She checked her watch. I have another meeting, but I wanted to drop this off. She handed him a business card. Val Mercer. She's an organizational consultant I've worked with before. The company's bringing her in tomorrow to do some team assessments. You might find her perspective helpful. Marcus looked down at the card. Doctor. Valerie Mercer, the difficult person whisperer, was printed in simple black text, along with a phone number. Is this a hint? He asked, trying to keep his tone light. Janet's expression remained serious. It's recognition that you have one of the most challenging teams to lead. Brilliant people often make difficult team members. Dr. Mercer specializes in exactly that dynamic. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The deadline for Prisma isn't moving. The company has too much riding on it. I took a chance promoting you, Marcus. Don't make me regret it. With that, she was gone, leaving Marcus standing in the hallway with the business card in his hand and 5 resistant personalities waiting behind the conference room door. He took a deep breath and re-entered the room, where the team had already begun to disperse. They clearly assumed the meeting was over in his absence. "We're not finished," he said, his voice firmer than usual. Everyone paused, varying expressions of surprise crossing their faces. "The system I've proposed isn't perfect. It needs your expertise to make it work. But some version of it will be implemented because the alternative is failure, and failure isn't an option for this team." He looked each team member in the eye as he continued. "For the rest of this meeting, I don't want to hear why it won't work. I want to hear how we can make it work. Zach, how do we build the flexibility you need while maintaining visibility for other teams? Maya, what quality gates are non-negotiable versus which ones can be streamlined? Ravi, instead of smoothing over conflicts, please help bring them to the surface early so we can address them. Jen, I need your institutional knowledge about what's failed before so we don't repeat those mistakes. And Tyler, I need you to help ensure innovation doesn't get stifled while still fitting within project constraints." A different kind of silence fell over the room, still resistant, but with an undercurrent of reluctant respect. "We'll take a 10-minute break," Marcus concluded. "When we come back, we'll restart with that framework." As the team filed out, Marcus remained at the front of the room, studying his carefully prepared diagrams. They represented his best attempt to systematize human behavior, to create order from the chaos of different personalities, working styles, and resistance patterns. But as Janet had just reminded him, his real job wasn't just about implementing a system, but changing behavior. Marcus mused at his difficult personalities in his work and home life, unsure how to implement change. The parallel struck him with uncomfortable clarity. He was trying to create game rules in both spheres where the other players didn't acknowledge the rulebook. In both cases, he was failing. As he rolled up his diagrams and stored them in their protective tube, Marcus wondered if he was playing the wrong game entirely. Chapter 3. Difficult is just the beginning. In games and life, the worst opponents aren't those who play against you, but those who pretend to play with you while playing a different game. Marcus Winters woke to cold sheets and silence. Vanessa's side of the bed remained undisturbed, the pillows still perfectly arranged, untouched since he'd crawled into bed alone the night before. Their argument after game night continued to echo in his mind. Her surgical accusations of weakness, his stammered apologetic retreat, and the decisive click of the bedroom door as she claimed the couch for herself. Even their sleeping arrangements had become a power play, a physical manifestation of the emotional chasm widening between them. He found her in the kitchen scrolling through her phone with practiced indifference. Despite the early hour, her makeup was flawless and her casual weekend attire was arranged with deliberate precision. The scent of fresh coffee hung in the air, a domestic normalcy that felt oddly threatening. "Morning," he ventured, reaching for the coffee pot. Vanessa didn't look up. "There's no more coffee. I finished it." It was objectively trivial. Brewing another pot would take minutes. They both knew that. They also both understood the delivered message, a calculated withdrawal of basic consideration, another subtle move in their unacknowledged competition. "No problem," Marcus replied, forcing lightness into his voice as he reached for the beans. "I'll make more. Did you sleep okay on the couch?" "Fine," she answered, still not meeting his eyes. "Better than being in bed with someone who doesn't support my career." And there it was. Thursday night's argument, preserved and repurposed. It was no longer about game night, but transformed into a broader indictment of his support for her professional aspirations. The goalposts hadn't just moved, they'd been transported to a different playing field. "Vanessa, that's not fair. I've always supported your career." She finally looked up, her expression a masterclass in wounded incredulity. "Really? Then why were you so upset about me bringing Lindsay to game night?" "She's not just my boss, Marcus. She controls the Reynolds account, our firm's biggest client. Do you have any idea how important it is for me to build a relationship with her outside the office?" Marcus recognized the conversational quicksand beneath his feet. The more he struggled to explain his position, the deeper he would sink. I understand that. I just wish you'd told me in advance that you were inviting them. So you could what? Prepare one of your little schedules? Put out the right number of coasters? Her tone transformed his methodical nature into a character defect. Sometimes opportunities happen in the moment. Lindsay mentioned she and Mark had nothing to do Thursday night, and I took the initiative. That's how careers advance, Marcus, not by asking permission to make simple decisions. He poured water into the coffee maker using the mundane task to buy time and emotional distance. You're right, I'm sorry, I overreacted. Vanessa held his gaze a moment longer, then returned to her phone, her demeanor shifting with practiced ease. It's fine. I know you're under pressure at work. Her voice softened, extending the smallest olive branch. How's the new project management thing going? The sudden change gave Marcus emotional whiplash, from prosecutorial attack to concerned spouse in the span of heartbeats. He grasped at this opening like a drowning man spotting a distant shore. It's challenging, he admitted, relief washing over him as the subject changed. The team is resistant to any kind of structure, but we need it to deliver on time. Vanessa nodded, now fully engaged. People resist change. That's human nature. She set down her phone, looking thoughtful. You know what might help. Bring them into the process. Make them feel like it's their idea. For the next 10 minutes, she offered surprisingly insightful suggestions about managing difficult personalities. This was the Vanessa he'd fallen in love with. Sharp, empathetic, engaged, the woman who approached problems as intellectual puzzles rather than emotional battlegrounds. As the new coffee finished brewing, Marcus felt the tension in his shoulders begin to release. Perhaps they turned a corner. Maybe the post-honeymoon adjustment period was finally ending. Hey, he said, pouring 2 fresh cups. Speaking of work pressure, I've been looking forward to our weekend at the lake. 3 days at that rental cabin will be exactly what we need. Vanessa accepted the coffee with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. About that, I meant to tell you, Lindsay and Mark have a yacht on the lake, just a few coves over from our rental. I mentioned we would be there, and they suggested we do dinner on their boat Saturday night. Isn't that perfect? We can relax during the day and network in the evening. Marcus froze, cup halfway to his lips. But that's our weekend. I thought it would be just us. It is just us, she replied, a hint of impatience creeping back into her voice. It's dinner on a yacht, Marcus, not a commitment to spend every second with them. Most people would be thrilled at the opportunity. I'm not most people, and neither are you, he said carefully. It's our time together. I made reservations at that restaurant you mentioned wanting to try. The one with the chef from that cooking show you like? Vanessa's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. You made reservations without checking with me first. I wanted it to be a surprise, he explained, already sensing the ground shifting beneath him. A surprise, she repeated flatly. So you're allowed to make plans without consulting me, but I'm not allowed to accept a dinner invitation. That's not... Do you have any idea how this makes you sound? Her voice rose slightly. Lindsay personally invited us onto her 60-foot luxury yacht, and you want to turn it down for some restaurant reservation? She set her coffee down with deliberate precision. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You don't support my career at all. Vanessa, please, that's not fair. Our weekend is special, and I just wanted... What you want, she interrupted, is to keep me small. To keep me contained in your little organized boxes like every other misogynistic man in the world. Tears appeared at the corners of her eyes with tactical precision. Do you know how much pressure I'm under right now? The Reynolds account is hanging by a thread, and my entire future at the firm depends on keeping Lindsay happy. Marcus felt the floor dissolving beneath him, rules changing mid-play. "I didn't know that," he said, guilt seeping through his defenses. "You didn't tell me things were that serious with the account." "Because you never ask." The tears flowed freely now. "You're so wrapped up in your work problems that you never even ask about mine. And the one time, I have a chance to build a meaningful connection with someone who can help my career, you want to block it because of some restaurant reservation." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Had he really been so self-absorbed? So unsupportive? Doubt flooded his mind, washing away the certainty he'd felt moments before. "I'm sorry," he said, approaching her cautiously. "I didn't realize. Of course, we can have dinner on their yacht. I'll cancel the reservation." Vanessa sniffed, wiping away tears that had somehow not disturbed her perfect makeup. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means a lot to me." By Sunday evening, the emotional tempest had subsided into an uneasy calm. Vanessa was once again affectionate, even suggesting they play one of his board games after dinner. As they set up the pieces, Marcus felt a hesitant optimism. Maybe they were finding their balance after all. As he was putting the game away, he overheard Vanessa on the phone in the other room. "I know, it was close," she was saying, her voice low. "But I managed to convince him." No, it wasn't easy. He actually made dinner reservations, can you believe it? "Don't worry, I did what you suggested. It brought up work pressure and added a few tears. Works every time. Got him wrapped around my finger." Marcus stood frozen, game box in hand, as the rest of the conversation faded into background noise. Marcus felt the cold splash of realization. He wasn't a participant in a dance, but a puppet whose strings she had been pulling with expert precision. Marcus realized he'd been an unwitting pawn in her calculated chess game while he played checkers. Yeah, Monday morning brought a different kind of emotional manipulation, but the patterns were eerily familiar. "I've implemented the system exactly as we discussed," Zach announced, dropping a file on Marcus's desk with theatrical flair. "The feature's complete and integrated." Marcus eyed him skeptically. "That was fast. Let me take a look." 10 minutes of code review revealed the truth. Zach had indeed built a feature, a brilliant one, with elegant, efficient code. It just wasn't the feature they had specified. Instead of creating the user authentication module that would integrate with the rest of the team's components, he'd built an entirely different security approach that would require everyone else to modify their work to accommodate his vision. "This isn't what we agreed on," Marcus said, looking up from his monitor. Zach shrugged, the picture of innocent confusion. "It's better than what we agreed on. My approach reduces authentication time by 40% and improves security." "What's the problem?" "The problem is that it doesn't integrate with what everyone else is building. They'll all have to rework their components to make this fit. So, my solution is objectively superior. They should want to adapt to it." The conversation continued in circles, with Zach portraying himself as the misunderstood genius, while Marcus tried to explain the concept of teamwork. It ended with Zach's reluctant agreement to look into adapting his code to the original specifications, though both knew this meant he would do the minimum possible to claim compliance. Maya was next, arriving precisely at their scheduled update meeting. "Where are we with the user interface components?" Marcus asked. "In progress," she replied, opening her laptop to display a series of immaculate wireframes. "I've refined the design to improve user flow. 14 critical aspects needed reconsideration." "This looks great, but where's the actual implementation?" "We agreed to have a working prototype by today." Maya's posture stiffened. "Quality can't be rushed. The implementation will follow once the design is perfected." "Maya, we need to ship. When will the code be ready?" "It will be done when it's done right," she said with finality. I won't attach my name to substandard work. Down the hall, Ravi was engaged in his own form of system sabotage. Despite their agreement that all team members would handle their assigned components, Marcus found him hunched over Jen's workstation, debugging her code while she sat nearby with headphones on. "Ravi, can I speak with you for a moment?" Marcus asked, motioning toward the corridor. Once out of earshot, Marcus confronted him. "We talked about this. Everyone needs to handle their own assignments." I know, Ravi said, rubbing his neck anxiously. But Jen was struggling with that integration issue, and if she fell behind, it would affect the timeline for everyone. I was just trying to help. By doing her work for her, instead of helping her learn how to do it herself? Sometimes it's faster just to fix things, Ravi protested. Isn't delivery the priority? It was a clever deflection, using Marcus's own concern for the timeline against him. By the time they finished their conversation, Ravi had promised to stop taking on others' work, but the damage was already done. Another bottleneck created, another dependency formed, another team member enabled in their problematic behavior. Jen's update came via email, 3 sentences that conveyed virtually no useful information. Made progress on database integration. Some issues remain, working through them. When Marcus requested elaboration, her response was equally minimal. Details are in the code comments. Can discuss this at the next team meeting if necessary. It wasn't an outright refusal. It was something more insidious, malicious compliance. Technically, following the letter of his request while completely violating its spirit, the final blow came late in the afternoon when Marcus discovered that Tyler Chase had changed the product specifications for his component without consultation. When confronted, Tyler leaned back in his chair, the picture of creative confidence. "I improved them," he said simply. "The original specs were too restrictive. My approach enhances the user experience." "That's not your call to make unilaterally," Marcus argued. "These changes affect other components and teams." Tyler's smile never wavered. "Sometimes vision requires boldness. You'll thank me when users love this feature." As Marcus left Tyler's desk, the word sabotage floated through his mind. It was the perfect description for what his team was doing. Not outright rebellion, but subtle undermining. The word itself had a fascinating origin, one he'd learned during a history elective in college. It came from French workers during the early Industrial Revolution, specifically disgruntled laborers who would throw their wooden shoes, called sabots, into factory machinery to damage or disable it. Saboteur literally meant to kick with sabots, or to make a loud clattering with shoes. Over time, sabotage evolved to describe any act of deliberate interference designed to damage or obstruct. What his team was doing wasn't as blatant as throwing shoes into machinery, but the effect was the same. Systematic obstruction of progress while maintaining the appearance of cooperation. The parallels to his relationship with Vanessa were impossible to ignore. Her emotional manipulations, the tears, the accusations, the convenient reframing of issues were sabotage of a different kind. Both at home and at work, Marcus found himself surrounded by people who agreed to one set of rules while secretly playing by another. By 6 o'clock, the office had emptied. Marcus sat alone at his desk, staring at the project timeline that now seemed hopelessly optimistic. His phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Working late with Lindsay on the Reynolds pitch. Don't wait up. Left you frozen lasagna in the fridge." He should go home. He should heat up that lasagna, maybe watch something mindless on TV. Try to get enough sleep to face another day of this tomorrow. Instead, he found himself walking to the parking garage and sitting in his car, keys in hand, but the engine off. The silence of the concrete structure enveloped him like a shroud. He couldn't face going home to an empty apartment filled with reminders of a relationship that increasingly felt like warfare. But he had nowhere else to go. No friends close enough to burden with the darkening thoughts swirling through his mind. No family nearby to provide refuge. As he sat in the dimly lit garage, Marcus finally admitted what he had avoided for weeks. His marriage and his team were mirror images of the same problem, environments where his fundamental approach to human interaction was failing catastrophically. In both spheres, he operated on fairness, clarity, and mutual agreement principles, while those around him employed manipulation, misdirection, and emotional warfare. The realization brought a wave of despair so profound that it momentarily took his breath away. If he couldn't make his marriage work or lead his team effectively, what did that say about him as a human being? What was the point of continuing to fight battles that seemed increasingly unwinnable? For one dark, terrible moment, Marcus found himself thinking that death would be a vacation from the constant struggle, a thought so foreign and frightening that it shocked him back to himself. He wasn't that person. He wouldn't become that person. But as he finally started his car and pulled out of the parking garage into the night, Marcus knew with absolute certainty that something had to change. He couldn't continue this path. Either he needed to find a new approach to dealing with difficult people or remove himself from their orbit entirely. The question was, which option would hurt less? Chapter 4. The Difficult Person, Whisperer. The most revealing moment in any game isn't when you're winning, but when you realize you don't understand the rules everyone else is playing by. Marcus Winters stared at the calendar notification with the resigned weariness of a man who'd survived too many corporate promises that evaporated into nothing. Team Effectiveness Workshop? Mandatory attendance. Conference Room B, 9 to 12. His morning had already carved a path through quicksand. Vanessa departing before dawn for a breakfast meeting, without acknowledging his existence, followed by the discovery that Zach had completely ignored yesterday's code check-in deadline. Now this. 3 precious hours of watching his team feign cooperation through trust falls and mission statement platitudes while the Prisma deadline loomed like an approaching storm. His temples pulsed with the beginning of what promised to be a magnificent headache. Still, Janet had marked it mandatory, and after their last conversation about timeline slippage, Marcus knew better than to test her patience. At 8:55, he grabbed his laptop and a fresh notepad, his small concession to appearing engaged, and made his way to Conference Room B. What he found stopped him cold in the doorway. The long conference table had been pushed against one wall like an afterthought. The chairs formed a perfect circle in the center of the room, but what sat on each chair caught Marcus's attention. A collection of objects that seemed randomly assembled yet deliberately placed. He approached the nearest chair cautiously. A handheld mirror. A miniature fence constructed of popsicle sticks. A stress ball shaped like Earth. A black sleep mask. And most puzzling of all, a plastic sheriff's badge that looked like it belonged in a child's costume set. They're not bombs, you know. You can pick them up. Marcus turned toward the voice. Standing by the whiteboard was a woman who couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, with a shock of silver hair cut in a severe asymmetrical style that somehow managed to be both academic and rebellious. She wore a flowing dress covered in geometric patterns that would have given a migraine to anyone staring too long and sturdy red hiking boots that had covered serious terrain. Around her neck hung what appeared to be a necklace made of small, polished stones. Nothing about her suggested corporate consultant. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "The objects," she replied, gesturing to the chair. "You're looking at them like they might explode. They won't. Though they might make you uncomfortable, which serves roughly the same purpose in psychological terms." She extended a hand. "Dr. Valerie Mercer. You must be Marcus." Her handshake was firm, direct, like everything else about her, it seemed. "Yes, I'm the team lead," he confirmed. "I wasn't quite expecting this." Dr. Mercer's mouth quirked up at one corner. "No one ever is, which is precisely the point. Expectation is the enemy of insight." She turned back to the whiteboard where she was writing single words in different colors. Resist, avoid, control, withdraw, placate. The team began filtering in, their reactions to the room setup as varied as their personalities. Zach's amused snort, Maya's visible discomfort, Ravi's immediate offer to help arrange index cards, Jen's retreat to the farthest seat with headphones firmly in place. Tyler Chase arrived last, surveying the scene with a practiced look of sophisticated disdain. "Please sit anywhere, Doctor," Mercer instructed. "Leave the objects in the bag for now." As they settled uncomfortably into the circle, Janet appeared in the doorway. "I see you've met Dr. Mercer," she said to the room. "I'll leave you in her capable hands. Full participation is expected." She was gone with that parting instruction and a meaningful look at Marcus. Dr. Mercer sat in the circle, her posture impeccable despite her small stature. "So," she began without preamble, "you're a team of brilliant individuals who struggle to function as a unit, building components of a product called Prisma that's behind schedule, with a launch date that won't move, led by a man who's had the misfortune of being promoted to manage people who all believe they could do his job better." She glanced around the circle. "Have I missed anything important?" The blunt assessment landed like a grenade in the center of the room. Maya shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Zach let out a low whistle. Ravi looked physically pained. "We have some communication challenges," Marcus offered diplomatically. Dr. Mercer fixed him with a penetrating stare. "You have much more than communication challenges, Mr. Winters. 5 people are playing 5 games while pretending to play a 6 together." She turned to address the entire group. "We'll start with an obvious truth that no one in this room wants to acknowledge. Difficult people rarely recognize themselves as difficult." Tyler Chase scoffed. "Is that what this is? A difficult people workshop? Because I have to tell you, Doctor, that label seems reductive for a team of our caliber." "Thank you for the perfect demonstration, Doctor." Mercer replied without missing a beat. She placed a note on an index card and taped it to the whiteboard under the label Control. Deflection through intellectual superiority was all the note said. Tyler blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Dr. Mercer continued as if the interruption had been scripted. "Each of you has a set of objects in a transparent bag you found on your chair when you arrived. Hold the bag in your hands if you haven't done so already." There was a moment of reluctant shuffling as everyone complied. "These objects represent the core principles we'll be exploring today. The magnifying glass represents seeing what is rather than seeing it through your narrative. Everything else gets much easier when we radically see and accept what is." She paused to make eye contact with the group, then continued. "The fence represents boundaries, what you will and won't accept from others. We'll learn to manage these in the most effective way, which is to say, balance consequences with candor and care, but that's more the sheriff's badge." She then held up her own plastic sheriff's star. "This represents consequences and accountability, holding others accountable and accepting it yourself. That can be stressful, but it's the difference between your team functioning or not." She continued. "The stress ball that looks like an earth refers to a point of view that helps with emotional regulation. Some call it the witness, but don't make this a woo-woo thing. It's seeing situations from a dispassionate distance so we can deal with what is rather than get sucked into games, misdirection, or stories. Some prefer a lighthouse symbol, but that's a question of personal preference." Dr. Mercer rose and began to pace slowly around the outside of the circle. "Difficult people aren't puzzles to solve," she continued, making notes on index cards as she moved. "They're weather systems to navigate. You can't change the weather, but you can learn to see it clearly, predict it, prepare for it, and protect yourself from its worst effects." Despite himself, Marcus found his attention riveted. Something about her directness, her complete lack of corporate sugarcoating, resonated with his current state of desperation. "For the next 3 hours, we'll be exploring how each of you contributes to the dysfunction of this team, and how each of you can begin to change those patterns. It won't be comfortable. It won't validate your self-perceptions. but it might, just might, help you deliver your product on time without destroying each other in the process. What followed was unlike any corporate workshop Marcus had ever experienced. There were no PowerPoint slides, team-building exercises, or inspirational videos. Instead, Dr. Mercer led them through a series of increasingly revealing interactions. Team members were asked to describe how others on the team made their work more difficult, and those being described were required to listen without defending themselves. Tyler Chase scoffed. "Is that what this is? A difficult people workshop? Because I have to tell you, Doctor, that label seems reductive for a team of our caliber." "Thank you for the perfect demonstration, Doctor." Mercer replied without missing a beat. She placed a note on an index card and taped it to the whiteboard under the label Control. Deflection through intellectual superiority was all the note said. Tyler blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Dr. Mercer continued as if the interruption had been scripted. "Each of you has a set of objects in a transparent bag you found on your chair when you arrived. Hold the bag in your hands if you haven't done so already." There was a moment of reluctant shuffling as everyone complied. These objects represent the core principles we'll be exploring today. The magnifying glass represents seeing what is rather than seeing it through your narrative. Everything else gets much easier when we radically see and accept what is. She paused to make eye contact with the group, then continued. The fence represents boundaries, what you will and won't accept from others. We'll learn to manage these in the most effective way, which is to say, balance consequences with candor and care, but that's more the sheriff's badge. She then held up her own plastic sheriff's star. This represents consequences and accountability, holding others accountable and accepting it yourself. That can be stressful, but it's the difference between your team functioning or not. She continued. The stress ball that looks like an earth refers to a point of view that helps with emotional regulation. Some call it the witness, but don't make this a woo-woo thing. It's seeing situations from a dispassionate distance so we can deal with what is rather than get sucked into games, misdirection, or stories. Some prefer a lighthouse symbol, but that's a question of personal preference. Dr. Mercer rose and began to pace slowly around the outside of the circle. Difficult people aren't puzzles to solve, she continued, making notes on index cards as she moved. They're weather systems to navigate. You can't change the weather, but you can learn to see it clearly, predict it, prepare for it, and protect yourself from its worst effects. Despite himself, Marcus found his attention riveted. Something about her directness, her complete lack of corporate sugarcoating, resonated with his current state of desperation. For the next 3 hours, we'll be exploring how each of you contributes to the dysfunction of this team, and how each of you can begin to change those patterns. It won't be comfortable. It won't validate your self-perceptions. But it might, just might, help you deliver your product on time without destroying each other in the process. What followed was unlike any corporate workshop Marcus had ever experienced. There were no PowerPoint slides, team-building exercises, or inspirational videos. Instead, Dr. Mercer led them through a series of increasingly revealing interactions. Team members were asked to describe how others on the team made their work more difficult, and those being described were required to listen without defending themselves. When Zach complained that Maya's perfectionism created unnecessary delays, Dr. Mercer didn't facilitate a dialogue about finding a middle ground. Instead, she asked Zach, "And how is her approach similar to your mother's?" The question landed like a slap. "What? My mother doesn't work here. She has nothing to do with this." "Doesn't she?" Dr. Mercer replied mildly. Our reactions to difficult colleagues often echo our earliest experiences with authority and opposition. Your file indicates you were raised by a single mother who was, in your words from a previous company assessment, impossibly demanding. Zach's face flushed. "You can't just, that's not relevant?" Dr. Mercer finished for him. "I disagree. The patterns we establish in childhood follow us into professional settings." Your resistance to Maya's standards mirrors your resistance to your mother's. The difference is that now you have coding brilliance as your shield instead of teenage rebellion. We can't fix what we don't acknowledge." The room fell silent. Marcus watched, fascinated, as Zach, perpetually glib, never at a loss for words, struggled to respond. Dr. Mercer didn't wait for him to recover. She moved on to Maya, asking why she couldn't complete tasks that weren't perfect, which led to an uncomfortable revelation about her immigrant parents' expectations. She cornered Ravi about his pathological need to smooth over conflict, tying it to his role in his family of origin. She somehow got Jen to admit that her minimal communication was a form of passive power retention. And she systematically dismantled Tyler's creative superiority complex by linking it to deep-seated insecurity. Throughout it all, she kept returning to a theme that increasingly captivated Marcus. The strategies that work with difficult personalities apply in every relationship: professional, personal, parental. Each time she said it, something clicked deeper into place for him. By the final hour, the team's typical resistance patterns were on full display, but with a crucial difference. Dr. Mercer seemed uncannily prepared for each defensive move, countering with questions so unexpected and incisive that they left even the most verbal team members momentarily speechless. When Zach tried to deflect with humor, she asked, "What are you afraid would happen if you engaged sincerely right now?" Zach stammered, then uttered, "I was just trying to lighten the mood." When Maya insisted her standards were objective rather than psychological, Dr. Mercer responded, "Would you apply those same standards to others, such as your own children? And if not, why do you believe your colleagues deserve less compassion than your hypothetical offspring?" When Ravi attempted to reframe a conflict as a misunderstanding, she inquired, "What physical sensation do you experience in your body when you witness direct confrontation? And where did you learn that this sensation is intolerable?" For each defensive maneuver, she had a question that cut through layers of pretense to something raw and real beneath. As she had done with Tyler, she wrote cards that represented resistive strategies in use by the team. As the session approached its end, Dr. Mercer handed each person an index card. "On these, I've noted your primary resistance pattern and a question for you to consider before our next session. Janet has approved weekly team meetings with me for the next month." She checked her watch. "We have 10 minutes remaining. Questions?" The room remained silent, most of the team looking vaguely shell-shocked, unable to utter a question. "Very well, please leave your objects on your chairs. They'll be here next week." She began gathering her materials. The team filed out quietly, each lost in thought, starkly contrasting their usual post-meeting chatter. Marcus remained seated, staring at his index card. Dr. Mercer wrote, "Primary pattern: conflict avoidance through process and systems creation. Question: what if the problem is your response choices to their resistance?" It was so accurately observed that it felt like a physical intrusion, as if she had performed a psychological X-ray within hours of meeting him. When everyone else had gone, Marcus approached Dr. Mercer as she packed her unusual collection of props into a colorful canvas bag. "Dr. Mercer, you look like someone whose personal and professional boats are taking on water to the point where you're almost drowning," she interrupted, not looking up from her packing. Marcus stared at her, startled by the precision of the observation. "How did you—" "Experience," she replied simply. 27 years working with difficult people and those who must manage them. Plus, you have the particular haunted look of someone playing games they don't fully understand." She straightened up, studying him with unnerving intensity. "What say you, Marcus?" He swallowed hard. Yes, that sounds accurate." Dr. Mercer nodded once as if confirming a hypothesis. "Tomorrow, Tuesday, 7 p.m., Rook Coffee on Main Street. Bring a game, something with clear rules but hidden information. We'll continue this conversation." "I'm sorry." "That's when and where I have an opening for a private client," she clarified. Janet has authorized individual coaching for you in addition to the team sessions if you're interested. The game is a diagnostic tool I use in the first session." Marcus hesitated only briefly. The prospect of finding a way through his parallel challenges, a guide who seemed to understand the terrain, was too compelling to refuse. "Yes, I'll be there," he said. "Good." She slung her bag over her shoulder, then fixed him with one final penetrating look. "One more thing, Mr. Winters. The work we'll do, should you choose to continue beyond our first session, isn't about making difficult people easy. It's about making yourself smarter and stronger to thrive despite them. Mostly that means a radical change in how you interact with them. Sometimes it means boundaries that range from limiting involvement to removing them from your life entirely. Are you prepared for a change of this magnitude?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with implications that reached far beyond his team dynamics. "All I know right now," Marcus shifted his weight, looking down and then directly into her eyes. "I cannot and will not continue as things are." Dr. Mercer's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That," she said, "is the only prerequisite for meaningful change. Commitment." She handed him a business card, the same one Janet had given him, with its simple black text reading, "Doctor." Valerie Mercer, the difficult person whisperer. "Tuesday then," she said, and walked out, leaving Marcus alone in the conference room with 5 chairs, each bearing its collection of strange, symbolic objects. As he gathered his things to leave, Marcus picked up the tiny popsicle stick fence from his chair and slipped it into his pocket. It felt like a talisman, a small physical reminder that boundaries existed and could be constructed, even out of the flimsiest materials, if one had the will to build them. For the first time in weeks, he felt something that resembled hope. Chapter 5. Acceptance without sugar. In games of skill, the first move isn't making a play, it's seeing the board, goals, and rules clearly. Marcus Winters arrived at Rook Coffee 15 minutes early, a slim box tucked under his arm. Inside was a card game called Coup, a bluffing game where hidden roles determined your abilities and limitations. He felt vaguely ridiculous, a grown man carrying a game to meet a professional consultant, as if heading to some bizarre therapy playdate. However, Dr. Mercer's instructions were explicit, and after the workshop, Marcus wasn't inclined to question her methods. However, they were unorthodox. The past 2 days had existed in a strange limbo. At work, his team operated with unusual restraint, following Dr. Mercer's workshop, like boxers circling each other after discovering their opponent possessed unexpected skills. Even Zach had submitted code on time, though he'd included a comment line that read, "Conforming to arbitrary deadlines against my better judgment." Still, it was progress of a sort. At home, Vanessa had conveniently departed for an overnight client meeting, leaving Marcus with his thoughts in the unsettling quiet of an empty apartment. The solitude felt less like abandonment and more like peace, a realization that brought its own complicated emotions. Rook Coffee was half empty when he pushed through the door. The evening crowd had not yet arrived. Dr. Mercer sat at a corner table by the window, her silver asymmetrical bob catching the late afternoon sunlight that slanted through the blinds. She wasn't looking at her phone or a book or even a coffee cup. Instead, she focused entirely on arranging small polished stones in patterns across the wooden tabletop, as if decoding some ancient message. "You're early," she said without looking up. "Good. Punctuality suggests you value both your time and mine." Marcus approached the table, noticing that the stones varied in color, size, and texture. Some were smooth river rocks, others rough-hewn crystals. A few appeared to be fossils embedded in stone. Each was placed with deliberate precision. "I brought a game, as requested," he said, holding up the box. Dr. Mercer nodded, still focused on her stone arrangement. "Set it aside for now. First things first." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit. Coffee?" "I'm fine, thanks." "I wasn't asking if you wanted coffee. I was asking if you'd had coffee today. Caffeine alters thought patterns. I need to know what brain I'm working with. Oh, Marcus blinked at the clarification. Yes, I had coffee this morning. Just 1 cup. She nodded again, as if confirming some private hypothesis. Good. Not enough to induce anxiety, but sufficient to clear morning fog. Finally, she looked up at him, her gaze direct and evaluating. How was your experience after the workshop? It was complicated, Marcus answered carefully. Complicated is a word people use when they're afraid to be specific, Dr. Mercer replied. Let's start with something concrete. She pushed several stones toward him, some white, some black, some in varying shades of gray. Sort these into 2 piles, things I can control and things I cannot control. As you place each stone, tell me something specific about your situation at home or work. Marcus stared at the stones. That's a strange way to begin. If you wanted ordinary approaches, you wouldn't be here, she countered, her expression unchanged. Indulge me. With slight hesitation, Marcus picked up a white stone. It was smooth, polished, and fit perfectly between his thumb and forefinger, like it had been waiting for his hand. I can control my team project management system at work, he said, placing it in the things I can control pile. Dr. Mercer's expression remained neutral. Next. He selected a black stone with rough edges. I cannot control my team's resistance to the system. Next. A gray stone mottled with darker flecks. I can control my responses to Vanessa's emotional outbursts. Can you? I suspect you want to. Dr. Mercer asked, her eyebrow arching slightly. Marcus hesitated, then moved the stone to the cannot control pile. Okay, well, not consistently at least. Better. Continue. Stone by stone, Marcus built his piles, articulating aspects of his work and home life as he went. Some placements came easily, others required careful consideration. Throughout the process, Dr. Mercer remained silent, allowing him to work through his categorizations without comment or correction. When the last stone had been placed, she studied the arrangement. Interesting. What's interesting about it? Marcus asked. Your can control pile is significantly larger than your cannot control pile, she observed. That suggests either remarkable personal power or significant delusion. The blunt assessment caught Marcus off guard. I believe in personal agency. So do I, Dr. Mercer replied, but I also believe in reality. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small silver bell, which she placed on the table between them. We're going to try something different now. She swept the stones back into a single pile, then selected one, a medium-sized gray stone with a band of white quartz running through its center. This stone represents your marriage, she said. Describe the current state of your relationship with Vanessa. Just the facts, without explanation, justification, or emotional coloring. Marcus took a deep breath. Vanessa and I have been married for almost 2 months. Things were good during dating and our honeymoon, but have become increasingly difficult since we returned. The silver bell rang softly but distinctly as Dr. Mercer tapped it with her finger. What was that for? Marcus asked, startled. Things were good is an interpretation, not a fact. It's also sugarcoating. Try again with neutral observation. Marcus frowned. During dating and our honeymoon, Vanessa was affectionate, supportive, and engaged in my interests. Since returning, the bell rang again. Marcus felt a flash of irritation. This is ridiculous. How am I supposed to... It's best to observe reality without coloring it with conclusions, with a narrative, she interrupted calmly. It's more difficult than it sounds because humans are storytelling creatures. We don't experience reality. We experience the stories we tell ourselves about reality. From her bag, she withdrew a second bell, this one brass with a deeper tone, and placed it beside the silver one. The silver bell is for sugarcoating, when you minimize or excuse problematic behavior. The brass bell is for bitterness, when you inject resentment or victimhood into your description. The goal is to describe what is without either sweetening or souring it. Just the observable facts. Marcus took another deep breath, centering himself. Vanessa and I interact primarily through arguments or periods of distance. We've had sex once since returning from our honeymoon, after she had been drinking. She criticizes my work habits, my game night, and my friends. When I express needs or preferences that conflict with hers, she often cries, raises her voice, or brings up unrelated past issues until I apologize and accommodate her preferences. He waited for the bell, but Dr. Mercer remained silent. She has changed plans we've made together multiple times without consulting me, including inviting her boss to join our upcoming weekend getaway. She accuses me of not supporting her career when confronted about these changes. I recently overheard her discussing with a friend how she manipulates me through tears and accusations. Dr. Mercer nodded. Better. Now the same exercise for your team. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus worked through descriptions of both situations, interrupted frequently by one bell or the other. The brass bell rang when he described Zach as deliberately undermining him or Tyler as narcissistic. The silver bell chimed when he suggested Ravi was just trying to help everyone, or that Maya has high standards because she cares about quality. The process was frustrating but illuminating. With each attempt, Marcus found himself getting closer to unvarnished descriptions, neither sugar-coated nor bitter, just clear observations of patterns and behaviors. Finally, Dr. Mercer held up a hand. Enough. It's time for your card game. They set up coup between them, and as Marcus explained the rules, each player had hidden character cards that granted different abilities, but could claim to have any character and its associated powers, risking challenge from opponents who believed they were bluffing. Dr. Mercer listened with unusual intensity. A game about deception and perception, she noted as they began to play. Appropriate. As the cards were dealt and the first rounds played, she introduced her first principle, weaving it naturally into their gameplay and conversation. The foundation of all change begins with awareness and acceptance of what is, she said, laying down a card. Not what you wish it would be, not what you fear it might become, but what it is right now. When we use factual, observant language, such as in our last exercise, it's easier to see things as they are. That sounds simple enough, Marcus replied, considering his move. The brass bell rang. There's nothing simple about it, Dr. Mercer corrected. Humans are extraordinarily talented at self-deception. We see what we want to see. We explain away what we don't want to acknowledge. We craft narratives that protect our egos and justify our choices, even when those narratives bear little resemblance to reality. She took one of his coins as she won the round, then continued. Your fundamental flaw in both situations is identical. You're attempting to solve problems that don't exist while ignoring problems that do. I what? What do you mean? At work, you've created an elaborate project management process and system to solve what you perceive as a coordination problem. But you have a difficult person problem. Your team members aren't failing to understand the system. They're choosing to undermine it because it threatens their goals and autonomy and exposes their weaknesses. The observation landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of recognition through Marcus. Similarly, Dr. Mercer continued, at home you're treating your marital difficulties as a communication problem. If only you could explain your needs better, set clearer expectations, choose the right moments for discussion. But your own observations reveal something quite different. Your wife understands you perfectly well. Crystal clear. She prioritizes her own needs and uses emotional manipulation to ensure they supersede yours. Her game is control. And from the conversation you overheard, she's winning. Marcus felt a cold clarity washing over him. So you're saying both situations are hopeless? The silver bell rang. That's sugarcoating through catastrophizing, Dr. Mercer said. When we make situations seem impossibly dire, it paradoxically comforts us because it absolves us of responsibility to act. If nothing can be done, we don't have to do anything. She dealt another hand. I'm not saying either situation is hopeless. I'm saying your current approaches are based on misdiagnosis. You can't solve problems you don't accurately perceive. And when you do see them accurately, you have to develop new strategies for the game you're actually playing. As they played, Dr. Mercer revealed more about her background, explaining how she came to develop her approach. I left academia 20 years ago, she said, studying her cards. The theories were elegant but disconnected from lived experience. I wanted to study what actually worked, not what should work according to psychological models. So, what did you find? Marcus asked. I found real people who successfully navigated difficult personalities in workplaces, families, communities. I observed them, interviewed them, and analyzed their approaches. The patterns were remarkably consistent, though the individuals rarely articulated them as systematic methods. She placed a card down, claiming the Duke character and taking 3 coins from the central pile. The first pattern was what I now call gray rock candor. It's a kind of a calm form of tough love. These individuals were direct yet dispassionate, like a gray rock in a riverbed, presenting no emotional footholds for manipulation. They stated facts without drama. They identified behaviors and consequences without blame or justification. Like what you're teaching me with the bells, Marcus observed. Precisely. The second pattern involved boundaries, clear, consistent, and reasonable limits on what they would and wouldn't accept, enforced through consequences rather than arguments. The third was emotional regulation, a capacity to observe their reactions without being controlled by them in what I call the witness watchtower. And these approaches worked with difficult people? Marcus asked, challenging her claimed character and losing another coin when she revealed she had the Contessa. They don't transform difficult people into easy ones, Dr. Mercer clarified. That's rarely possible. By increasing your ability to understand and navigate them, you change the dynamics of the relationship. As the game progressed, Dr. Mercer elaborated on her research findings, describing how successful difficult person navigators shared certain key characteristics. They spoke up rather than swallowing grievances. They gathered information before confronting. They consistently linked behaviors with consequences, like effective parents using natural outcomes rather than punishment. One fundamental difference, she explained as she won the final hand, was that these individuals accepted reality without resentment or sugarcoating. They saw difficult people clearly, without the distorting lenses of wishful thinking or bitter disappointment. That's the start. She began collecting her stones, returning them to a small velvet pouch. Which brings us to your homework assignment. Homework? Marcus echoed. Did you think our sessions would be self-contained? Change requires practice. She handed him a small leather-bound notebook. For 1 week, I want you to operate in pure observation mode. For now, don't attempt to fix or change either situation, not your team, not your marriage. Just watch and record the patterns you observe without sugarcoating or bitterness. Just watch. That's it. That's everything, Doctor, Mercer corrected. Accurate perception is the foundation of effective action. Most of us never see clearly because we're too busy reacting, justifying, or planning our next move. For the next week, journal the shit out of what you see, but stick with observations as avoid conclusions. She placed the 2 bells in his hand, closing his fingers around them. Use these mentally when you see yourself distorting reality, either making excuses or adding resentment to your observations. As Marcus prepared to leave, Dr. Mercer offered one final instruction. Just watch the weather, she told him, without trying to make it sunny. A storm observed is still a storm, but you're less likely to be struck by lightning if you see it coming. Marcus nodded, pocketing the bells in the notebook. Same time next week? Same time, same place, Dr. Mercer confirmed. Bring a different game. Something about defending territory while maintaining open supply lines. And Marcus? He paused, looking back at her. The most difficult step in any game isn't making the winning move, she said. It's being willing to see the board as it actually is, not as you wish it were. Most people never manage that first step, which is why they remain perpetually trapped in games they cannot win. As Marcus walked to his car, the weight of the small bells in his pocket felt strangely comforting. Tangible reminders that reality, however uncomfortable, was at least something solid he could stand on. For the first time in months, he felt he had found stable ground. Chapter 6. Boundaries and Bridges. The most successful players know that protecting your position requires walls and bridges. As Marcus entered Rook Coffee the following Tuesday, the leather-bound notebook felt heavier than its physical weight. 7 days of pure observation had transformed the slim volume into something more significant. A record of uncomfortable truths that could no longer be denied or sugar-coated. He'd arrived 10 minutes early, but Dr. Mercer was already there, this time arranging what appeared to be dollhouse furniture on the table. Tiny sofas, miniature beds, diminutive tables and chairs, all carefully positioned as if creating a floor plan for a house that existed only in her mind. "You've been busy," she observed without looking up as he approached, somehow sensing his presence. "I can see it in your posture." Marcus set down the notebook and a box containing the game Catan Cities and Knights, his choice for a game about defending territory while maintaining supply lines. "It's been illuminating," he admitted, sliding into the chair across from her. "Illumination can be painful," Dr. Mercer replied, placing a tiny dining table in what appeared to be a kitchen area. "We grow accustomed to the dark, develop ways of navigating it because it feels better. The sudden light reveals obstacles we've been carefully stepping around." She finally looked up, her sharp eyes assessing him. "Idle chit-chat first, or observations?" "Observations," Marcus said decisively. "I've been carrying these around all week. I need to put them down." Dr. Mercer nodded approvingly. "Good. Priorities matter." She gestured to the notebook. "Show me what you've seen." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus worked through his observations, reading directly from pages filled with meticulous notes. He'd recorded patterns of behavior, specific incidents, and his reactions, all with a new clarity that surprised even him. At home, he'd documented Vanessa's predictable cycle: criticism followed by emotional escalation when challenged, then subtle or overt threats, to leave, to call her mother, to cancel plans, culminating in Marcus's inevitable capitulation and her temporary warmth afterward. The pattern repeated with such consistency that he'd been able to predict stages before they unfolded. At work, he'd observed equally consistent patterns: Zach's brilliant but deliberate misdirection, Maya's perfectionism as a delay tactic, Ravi's conflict avoidance creating downstream problems, Jen's minimal compliance and Tyler's unilateral changes, justified as creative improvements. Dr. Mercer remained silent throughout his recitation, occasionally placing another piece of miniature furniture on her makeshift floor plan. By the time Marcus finished, she had created a complete dollhouse layout. "Good observations," she said when he closed the notebook. "You've developed remarkable clarity in a short time, faster than most." "It wasn't as difficult as I expected," Marcus admitted. "Once I started looking for patterns, observations rather than explanations, they became impossible to miss." Exactly. Patterns reveal themselves when we stop creating stories about them. She reached into her bag and withdrew something familiar: the small popsicle stick fence from their first workshop, which she placed at various points in the dollhouse layout. Now we move to the next principle: boundaries. She tapped one of the popsicle fences positioned between what appeared to be a living room and dining area. Most people misunderstand boundaries. They think of them as walls designed to keep others out: rigid, impermeable, divisive. But healthy boundaries are more like property lines with gates you control. Marcus studied the miniature layout, beginning to understand the metaphor. So it's not about excluding people, but regulating how they enter your space? Yes, that works. Dr. Mercer moved a tiny figure from one room to another. Boundaries define where you end and others begin. What's yours to control and what isn't? They're not rejections, they're clarifications. She gestured to the notebook. Based on your observations, what areas of your life most need clear boundaries? Marcus considered the question carefully. At home, definitely game night. It's important to me, and Vanessa has repeatedly violated what should be my personal space and time. Good. What else? Our financial decisions. Vanessa makes major purchases without consulting me, though we've agreed to discuss anything over $100 not in our budget. And at work. The project timeline, Marcus said without hesitation. My team needs to respect deadlines, not just for my sake, but for the other departments depending on us. And your weekends, Dr. Mercer added, surprising him. You've noted 3 times that team members texted you with non-emergency issues during personal time, expecting immediate responses. Marcus blinked. I didn't even register that as a boundary violation. I just thought it was part of being a manager. That's how boundaries erode, she said, lifting one of the popsicle fences and breaking it. Not through dramatic confrontations, but through small, seemingly reasonable encroachments that we justify until the line disappears entirely. She set up the game he'd brought, studying the board with unusual intensity as he explained the rules. In cities and knights, players build roads and settlements and have to defend against barbarian invasions while developing their civilizations. Resource management, defensive strategy, and development had to be balanced. Dr. Mercer continued her boundary lesson as they began to play, weaving it into the gameplay. Notice how in this game, defending your territory requires planning and resources, she observed, placing a knight on her section of the board. The same is true of personal boundaries. They don't maintain themselves. They require consciousness, energy, and consistent reinforcement. She rolled the dice, advancing the barbarian ship one space closer to their shared island. The other critical element is specificity. Vague boundaries are impossible to maintain. Respect my space means something different to everyone. Don't enter my study between 7 and 9 p.m. on Thursdays is clear and actionable. Dr. Mercer helped Marcus craft specific, actionable boundaries for his most critical areas as the game progressed. For game night, it would start promptly at 7 p.m. on Thursdays with only pre-approved guests and would remain focused on games rather than socializing or networking. For the project timeline, team members would submit substantive updates through the system by 4 p.m. every Thursday, with any anticipated delays communicated at least 48 hours in advance. These are well-defined, Doctor, Mercer noted, trading resource cards with him. But boundaries without consequences are suggestions. What happens when these boundaries are violated? Marcus hesitated. I'm not sure. I don't want to be punitive. Consequences aren't punishment, she corrected. They're the natural results of choices. When a player in this game fails to build knights, the consequence is vulnerability to barbarian attacks. It's not punishment, it's the logical outcome of their decision. She helped him develop appropriate consequences for boundary violations. If Vanessa disrupted game night, he would continue as planned without accommodating her interruption. If she made unapproved purchases, they would come from her personal funds, not their joint account. If team members missed update deadlines, they would need to present their status in the weekly meeting with Janet. The secret, she told him, moving her knight to capture one of his settlements, is that boundaries without consequences are just suggestions, and consequences without care are just punishment. What do you mean by care? Marcus asked. Consequences enforced without compassion become weapons rather than guardrails, Dr. Mercer explained. They must be applied with genuine concern for everyone involved, including the boundary violator. The goal isn't to win or to hurt, but to create healthy patterns of interaction. She demonstrated by pointing out how, in the game, helping another player defend against barbarians sometimes benefited the entire island, even if it meant temporarily assisting a competitor. Boundaries define separation, but bridges enable connection. You need both. For each consequence they'd developed, Dr. Mercer now helped Marcus identify a way to show care while enforcing it. If continuing game night despite Vanessa's interruption, he could offer to discuss her needs immediately afterward. If missed updates are required to be presented to Janet, he could provide preparation support to the team members before the meeting. As they completed the game, which Dr. Mercer won handily, having apparently mastered strategy games alongside psychological principles, she presented his homework assignment. First, refine these boundaries and consequences until they're clear enough to explain to a 10-year-old, she instructed, handing him a fresh notebook. If you can't articulate them simply, you won't maintain them under pressure. And second, implement one boundary in each domain, home and work. Start small with something important but not your most charged issue. Document the reactions, your response, and the outcome. Marcus nodded, already mentally sorting which boundaries might serve as appropriate starting points. Dr. Val handed him a card that included phrases for creating strong boundaries and ones that weaken them. Remember, Dr. Mercer said, gathering her miniature furniture back into a velvet bag, boundaries aren't about controlling others. They're about clarifying what you will and won't accept in your life. Others remain free to make their choices, and you remain free to respond with appropriate consequences. As she packed up, she paused, fixing him with her penetrating gaze. One final thought: the most challenging aspect of boundaries isn't setting them. It's maintaining them when they're tested. And make no mistake, Marcus, they will be tested. By Vanessa and my team? By them, certainly, but more importantly, by your discomfort with conflict. She handed him one of the popsicle stick fences. Boundary crossers depend on your discomfort. They count on your fear of tension, aversion to disapproval, and need to be liked. Real change begins when you maintain a boundary despite these internal pressures. Marcus turned the small fence over in his hands, considering its fragility. These don't seem very sturdy. Neither are boundaries at first, Dr. Mercer agreed. They're strengthened through consistent enforcement, not initial construction. The flimsiest fence maintained with conviction becomes stronger than the sturdiest wall abandoned at the first challenge. On his drive home, Marcus reflected on how differently he now viewed his situation. A week ago, he'd been drowning in confusion and resentment. Now he felt a growing clarity. Not about changing Vanessa or his team, but about changing the rules of engagement. For the first time, he understood that he'd been playing a game without clear boundaries, where the other players could move his pieces, redefine scoring, or change directions mid-play. No wonder he'd been losing. Pulling into his driveway, he noticed Vanessa's car was already there, though she'd told him she would be working late. A test of boundaries before he'd even set them? Perhaps. But he recognized that his mind created a story about Vanessa's arrival time without much data. He decided to be curious when he entered the condo. He tucked the popsicle stick fence into his pocket like a talisman and prepared to enter his home. Not as a victim or an adversary, but as someone finally ready to establish the rules of his own game. Chapter 7. The Witness. The real mastery in any game lies not in controlling it, but in controlling yourself when the rules shift unexpectedly. Rain fell in gentle sheets across Rook Coffee's patio, creating a rhythmic percussion that Marcus found oddly calming. Dr. Mercer had texted him that morning with a change of location. Meet at the outdoor seating, bring an umbrella and a waterproof game. This explained why he now sat beneath an awning, protected from the light spring storm, but close enough to feel its presence. The past week had tested every ounce of his resolve. His attempts to establish boundaries had been met with predictable resistance, but experiencing that resistance with new awareness had transformed his understanding of his relationships and himself. He'd begun to recognize the game board for what it was, not what he'd wished it to be. Dr. Mercer arrived precisely on time, her silver asymmetrical bob partially hidden beneath a transparent rain hat that somehow looked practical and eccentric. She carried a small, waterproof container rather than her usual bag of psychological props. Good choice of seating, she noted, settling across from him at the corner table furthest from other patrons. Maximum privacy with optimal exit routes. Marcus wasn't entirely sure if she was joking. "I brought the game," he said, placing a deck of cards in a plastic case on the table. Poker, specifically Texas Hold'em. Clear rules but hidden information, plus the need to maintain composure regardless of your hand. "Excellent selection," she replied, opening her container to reveal a thermos and 2 metal cups. "Tea today, not coffee." Green tea with ginger and lemongrass, it clarifies thinking. Without waiting for a response, she poured 2 cups, placing one before him. The steam rose between them, fragrant and grounding in the humid air. "Report on your boundary implementation," she instructed, her direct manner now familiar enough that Marcus found it refreshing rather than jarring. "Mixed results," he began, opening his notebook. "At home, I started with the punctuality boundary we discussed. I calmly informed Vanessa that I would leave for game night 10 minutes before the start time, whether she was ready or not." And her initial response? Surprise, as if the concept of a fixed departure time was somehow radical, Marcus admitted. She nodded in a way that suggested compliance without commitment. "And when the actual moment arrived," Dr. Mercer prompted. "At 6:50, I called upstairs and said that I was leaving." She didn't respond, so I left as planned. No drama in the moment, but by 7:30, my phone was lighting up with accusations. How I didn't respect her, how controlling I was becoming. "And what did you do?" "I maintained the boundary," Marcus said, feeling pride and discomfort at the memory. "I texted back only once. I'm sorry you decided not to be ready when I needed to leave. We miss you here." Then I put my phone away and focused on game night. Then what happened? When I got home, she was waiting. Cold fury at first, then escalating into tears about how I'd changed, how I'd become controlling, how I didn't love her anymore. Marcus paused, sipping the tea. I simply repeated what I'd texted earlier, that I was sorry she'd chosen not to be ready, and we'd missed her at game night. Then I went to bed. The rain intensified slightly, creating a curtain of water around their sheltered space. Dr. Mercer remained silent, sipping her tea, her gaze steady but not unkind. "I almost broke," Marcus admitted. "The tears always work on me. But I remembered what you said about consequences without care. So I told her I loved her and was committed to our marriage, and game night was important to me, and I needed her to respect that commitment." And the final outcome? She slept on the couch again. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. Classic pattern, but there was a difference. She seemed, I don't know, watchful, like she was reevaluating something about me. Dr. Mercer nodded approvingly. "And at work, I implemented the Thursday update requirement. Everyone must submit substantive progress reports by 4 p.m. Thursday, or present their status directly to Janet in the Friday morning meeting." Reactions? Varied by person, exactly as you'd predict. Marcus couldn't help but smile slightly at how predictable his team had become once he understood their patterns. Zach ignored the deadline entirely, claimed he was in the zone coding and lost track of time. Maya submitted a 5-page document detailing every minute aspect of her work, but nothing about completion percentages or timelines. Ravi turned his in early but included updates on everyone else's work rather than focusing on his assignments. Jen provided the absolute minimum information possible while technically complying. And Tyler submitted an elaborate presentation on a feature he had decided to add that wasn't in the original specifications. And the consequences. Friday morning, Zach and Tyler had to present their status directly to Janet. Zach was visibly uncomfortable. He hates formal presentations. Tyler initially seemed to enjoy the spotlight, until Janet began asking pointed questions about how his unauthorized feature affected the timeline. Dr. Mercer set down her cup, folding her hands on the table. What I find most interesting about both scenarios isn't what they did, but how you felt while maintaining your boundaries. Marcus hadn't expected this angle. I felt terrible, actually. I was physically sick to my stomach with Vanessa, guilty and doubting myself at work, and yet simultaneously, more solid somehow, like I was standing on firm ground even while feeling awful about it. Does that make any sense? Perfect sense, Dr. Mercer said, her voice softening slightly. This brings us to today's principle: the emotional watchtower or the witness. She reached into her container and removed a small object, a miniature lighthouse carved from wood, which she placed between them. Unlike her usual teaching props, this one seemed handcrafted, and the details were worn smooth as if they had been handled many times over many years. The greatest weakness in any boundary system isn't structural but emotional, she explained, turning the tiny lighthouse so its painted beam faced Marcus. Difficult people instinctively target emotional vulnerabilities because emotions override rational thought and carefully constructed boundaries. She opened the deck of cards he'd brought, beginning to shuffle with surprising dexterity. Think of your emotions during these confrontations as weather conditions affecting visibility. Fear clouds judgment. Guilt distorts perspective. Anger narrows focus. When the emotional weather turns stormy, you need a position of clarity above the tumult. The watchtower, Marcus said, understanding the metaphor. Precisely. An emotional watchtower is a mental space from which you observe the interaction and your emotional responses to it, without being swept away by either. She dealt cards between them, face down. In poker, the successful player isn't the one without emotions, but the one who observes their emotions without being controlled by them. As they began to play, Dr. Mercer introduced a variation. Before certain hands, she would make statements designed to trigger emotional responses, statements eerily similar to the ones Vanessa and her team members had used. Your rigidity is pushing everyone away, she said calmly, raising the bet. You're turning into your father. Marcus felt a jolt of defensive anger which must have shown on his face because Dr. Mercer immediately called a halt. You're on the ground now in the storm, she observed. What emotion just hit you? Anger, and fear that she might be right, he admitted. Climb the watchtower, Dr. Mercer instructed. Observe the anger as weather, not as yourself. Use language like, there is anger arising, rather than, I am angry. They reset and tried again. Each time she leveraged a trigger statement, she helped him identify his emotional response and practice observing it from the watchtower perspective. When he displayed signs of guilt, they paused and reset. When his face revealed hurt, they stopped and climbed the metaphorical watchtower again. Your emotional reactions are food for difficult behaviors and the predators who use them, she explained while calmly playing a hand that cost him the game. Starve the behaviors not by becoming cold, but by shifting perspectives. Higher. Seeing what is. How do you maintain this watchtower during intense confrontations? Marcus asked, frustrated by how easily his emotions had been triggered despite his best efforts. Practice and preparation, Dr. Mercer replied. You must know your emotional triggers before you enter challenging interactions. And you must have pre-planned responses. Not just what you'll say, but how you'll center yourself. She demonstrated several techniques, focusing on breathing patterns, grounding exercises where he focused on physical sensations, and mental reframing practices. Each was designed to create space between emotional triggers and responses. The watchtower doesn't prevent you from feeling emotions, she clarified. It prevents emotions from making your decisions for you. From the watchtower, you can see both the emotional weather and the actual landscape of the interaction. It's like being two people at once, Marcus observed, the one experiencing and the one watching. More accurately, it's being fully integrated, aware of both your experiencing self and your observing self simultaneously. Dr. Mercer gathered the cards, her movements deliberate and centered. Most people live at the mercy of their emotional weather. They're reactive, defensive, and easily manipulated through their triggers. The watchtower offers something different. Not emotional suppression, but emotional sovereignty. The rain had eased now, transforming from steady sheets to gentle mist. The natural boundary it had created around their conversation remained, but it was softer and more permeable. "Why did you choose to meet outside today?" Marcus asked suddenly, the question occurring to him as the weather shifted. Dr. Mercer's mouth quirked in her version of a smile. Nature provides its own emotional regulation. The rain, the limitations of the space, the background ambient sound, all create natural conditions for watchtower thinking. She gestured around them. Notice how different you feel discussing difficult topics here versus in an enclosed room. Marcus realized she was right. The open air, the gentle background of rainfall, and the defined but permeable boundary of the awning all contributed to a sense of both containment and freedom that facilitated clearer thinking. As they prepared to conclude the session, Dr. Mercer presented his homework. 3 assignments this week. First, identify your top 5 emotional triggers in each relationship. The statements or situations that most reliably pull you from your watchtower. She handed him a small notebook with a lighthouse embossed on its cover. Second, develop a specific centering technique for each trigger, a pre-planned way to regain your watchtower perspective when that particular emotional storm hits. And third, practice the gray rock technique when boundaries are challenged. Not cold, not cruel, but calm and factual, like a gray rock in a riverbed that water flows around rather than engaging with. Clear mind leading to clear actions based on what others do, not on what they make you feel. She handed him the wooden lighthouse. Keep this with you during difficult interactions. A physical reminder of your emotional watchtower. Marcus accepted it, surprised by the personal nature of the gift. "This seems special to you." Dr. Mercer's expression remained neutral, but something flickered briefly in her eyes. "It served its purpose for me. Now it can serve you." As Marcus prepared to leave, she offered one final observation. "You're making remarkable progress, but prepare yourself. When difficult people realize their usual emotional triggers no longer work, they typically escalate before they adjust. The storms may intensify before they pass." "That's not very encouraging," Marcus noted. "I'm not here to encourage false hope," Dr. Mercer replied with characteristic directness. "I'm here to prepare you for reality. The question isn't whether the storms will come, but whether your watchtower will stand." The rain had stopped completely as Marcus walked to his car, the wooden lighthouse secure in his pocket. Above him, clouds were breaking, allowing scattered beams of sunlight to penetrate. He couldn't help but appreciate the metaphor, emotional clarity breaking through after the storm of triggered reactions. For the first time, he felt not just intellectually equipped, but emotionally prepared to face the challenges ahead. The boundaries he'd established were still fragile and being tested, but now he had a watchtower from which to observe them without being overwhelmed by them. Or so he hoped. As he drove home, he mentally rehearsed watching his emotional weather rather than becoming it. The concept seemed strange, almost artificial. Yet he'd experienced moments of that clarity during their session, brief glimpses of what it might feel like to respond from a place of emotional sovereignty rather than emotional reactivity. He placed the wooden lighthouse on his dashboard, a tangible reminder of this new perspective. He was beginning to realize that the most challenging game wasn't the one he played with Vanessa or his team. It was the one he played with himself. Chapter 8. Candor and consequences. The most powerful move in any game isn't the one that captures an opponent's piece, but the one that changes the fundamental nature of play itself. Marcus arranged the snacks with the same methodical precision he had always brought to game night, but the man performing this ritual bore little resemblance to the one who had done it a month before. The wooden lighthouse sat on the kitchen counter beside him, its carved details catching the light. A talisman. A reminder. A physical embodiment of the emotional watchtower he had been practicing since his last session with Dr. Mercer. The past week had been nothing short of transformative. He'd identified his emotional triggers in both relationships, the specific phrases, tones, and expressions that most reliably knocked him from his watchtower. He'd developed and rehearsed centering techniques for each one. Most importantly, he'd practiced the gray rock approach during minor boundary tests, remaining calm and factual rather than defensive or placating. Like a boulder in a stream, letting the water rush around him without being moved. Tonight would be the true test. Game night had evolved beyond a weekly ritual. It had become symbolic territory, the contested ground upon which his marriage's future power dynamics would be determined. He knew this. And based on subtle cues throughout the week, casual mentions of alternative plans, questions about flexibility, Vanessa knew it too. The doorbell rang at 6:45. Alex early as usual. "How's it going?" Alex asked as Marcus welcomed him in. The question carried more weight than its casual delivery suggested. Alex had witnessed enough tension during recent game nights to understand something significant was shifting in his friend's marriage. "Better," Marcus replied, with a small smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. "Actually better." By 6:55, Priya and the married couple, James and Sophia, had arrived. The table was set, the tournament bracket drawn, the games selected and stacked according to playing time and complexity. Everything was ready. Everything except Vanessa. At 6:57, just as the group was settling around the table, Marcus's phone chimed with a text message. He glanced at the screen, unsurprised by its content or its timing. At dinner with Lindsay and Mark. Thought game night was tomorrow. My bad. Join me for dinner? 3 minutes before game night, despite the calendar invitation he'd sent to her work email, despite the reminder note he'd left on the refrigerator that morning, despite their conversation about it just last night. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. A test, then. One he had anticipated. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling a familiar tightening in his chest, the precursor to anxiety that typically preceded their conflicts. He placed his hand on the wooden lighthouse in his pocket, centering himself in the present moment. "No, as I said last night, it's game night with friends." "We'll miss you," he texted back. "Enjoy your night with Lindsay and Mark." His phone rang almost immediately. The screen displaying Vanessa's name felt like a summons to battle. "I'll be right back," he told his friends, stepping into the hallway to take the call. "What do you mean enjoy your night with friends?" Vanessa demanded without preamble, her voice sharp with indignation. "Why are they more important than me?" Marcus climbed his mental watchtower, observing the familiar emotional hooks being cast his way. Guilt, obligation, the implied accusation of failing as a husband. From this vantage point, they were visible as tactics rather than truths. "You sound angry," he said, his voice steady. "Game night is scheduled for tonight, as we discussed yesterday. It appears you've chosen to have dinner with Lindsay instead, which is fine, but I'm staying with my original plans." "Chosen?" Her voice rose in pitch. "How dare you project your bullshit onto me like that?" "I understand Lindsay is important to your career," he acknowledged, neither defending nor attacking. "And I also understand you've made your choice for tonight." A brief silence followed, the moment of recalibration he'd come to recognize. Vanessa was a skilled player, quick to adjust when a strategy wasn't working. "You know, you've been different lately," she said, her tone shifting from confrontational to concerned. "Everyone's noticed it. You're so distant now, so cold. This isn't the Marcus I married." The emotional hook dangled before him. Guilt, self-doubt, the fear of becoming someone unlikable. In the past, he would have grabbed it, apologized, and rearranged his plans to accommodate her last-minute change. From his emotional watchtower, he focused on his breath as he observed the feeling rising without being swept away by it. "I accept that as your opinion," he said simply. "Game night is important to me. Your career is important to you. Both can exist without conflict. I've made my choice for tonight, and you've made yours." "You're choosing your stupid games over me," she said, frustration creeping back into her voice. "I'm not choosing games over you. I'm choosing to maintain a commitment I made to myself and my friends. You're choosing dinner with your colleagues." "I can't believe we're even having this conversation," Vanessa snapped, escalating to anger now that guilt hadn't worked. "If you refuse to support me, I don't know how our marriage can continue." "I understand that's how you see it," Marcus replied, maintaining his centered perspective. "I see it as each of us making choices about our priorities tonight. I'm going to go back to my guests. Enjoy." The call ended abruptly. Either Vanessa had hung up or the connection had dropped. It didn't matter. His friends looked up expectantly as he returned to the table, their expressions varying degrees of concerned and curious. "Everything okay?" James asked cautiously. "Just fine," Marcus replied with more confidence than he'd ever felt during one of these conflicts. "Vanessa is having dinner with colleagues. She might join us later. Let's get started." Game night proceeded with a lightness that had been missing for months. Without the undercurrent of tension, Vanessa typically brought the evening flowed naturally from one game to the next. Marcus remained fully present, his enjoyment untainted by anticipatory anxiety about his wife's reaction. At 10:37, the front door opened. Vanessa entered, her expression a carefully constructed mask of pleasant neutrality that didn't quite reach her eyes. She surveyed the scene, the four friends mid-game, empty snack bowls, and Marcus looking up at her with calm acknowledgement rather than anxious appeasement. "Room for one more?" she asked with a tight smile. "Always," Marcus replied, genuinely meaning it. "We're about to start a new round." She joined them, maintaining a performance of cheerful engagement that almost, but not quite, disguised her simmering resentment. When their friends left shortly after midnight, Marcus prepared himself for the confrontation he knew would follow. It came, but not as he expected. "You embarrassed me," Vanessa said quietly as they cleared the living room, "making me look like the wife who doesn't know her own husband's schedule." "Embarrassed? That wasn't my intention," Marcus replied. "And I don't think anyone saw it that way." "You've changed," she continued, ignoring his response. "Dr. Mercer is changing you." Marcus looked up startled. "Dr. Mercer? How do you know about Dr. Mercer?" "I have access to your calendar, remember?" "You think I wouldn't notice weekly appointments with someone called the difficult person whisperer?" Her laugh held no humor. Subtle, Marcus. Really subtle. He hadn't considered this angle, that she might discover his sessions and interpret them as an indictment. "It feels like you're looking for a way to put me on my heels." "I have two thoughts. One is that you looked at my calendar but got game night wrong. Okay, it is what it is. The second is that Dr. Mercer is helping me become more effective at work," he said, deciding on a partial truth. "My team has challenging dynamics." "Is that all she's helping with?" Vanessa asked, her eyes narrowing. "Because it seems like you're applying her techniques to me too. Like I'm just another difficult person you need to manage." The accusation hung in the air between them, uncomfortably close to the truth. Marcus climbed his mental watchtower, observing the guilt and defensiveness rising within him without being controlled by them. "I'm learning to be clearer about my needs and boundaries," he said with a slight smile. "With everyone in my life, including you." "And if I don't like these new boundaries?" she challenged. "Then we talk about it," he replied calmly. "We adjust. We find solutions that work for both of us. But they need to be win-win solutions, not just me giving in or abandoning what matters to me. Vanessa studied him for a long moment, as if seeing someone new and slightly dangerous. Without another word, she turned and walked to the bedroom, closing the door with deliberate softness rather than the slam he'd expected. Marcus finished cleaning up, his emotional watchtower holding steady despite the turbulence. The confrontation had been uncomfortable but necessary, a recalibration of patterns that had been dysfunctional for too long. Monday morning brought the professional application of his new approach. Marcus had scheduled individual meetings with each team member and blocked 30 minutes on their calendars with the title, Project Alignment Session. Zach arrived characteristically late, dropping into the chair across from Marcus with his usual performative casualness. "What's up, boss? Another system refinement?" "Not exactly," Marcus replied. "This is about setting clear expectations and consequences." Zach's eyebrows rose slightly. "Sounds ominous." "It's not meant to be," Marcus said. "It's meant to be honest, to create a mutual win." He opened the folder before him, where he'd prepared notes for each team member. Specific observations, clear requests, and defined consequences. "Your brilliance isn't in question, Zach. Your code is consistently innovative and elegant. Reliability is a concern. You've missed 7 deadlines in the past month. Your components are consistently the last delivered and require the most integration fixes from other team members. I want to create a plan to improve reliability." Zach's posture shifted subtly, the affected nonchalance giving way to defensiveness. Creative work can't be scheduled like factory production. Sometimes brilliance needs space. "I agree," Marcus acknowledged, "which is why I've built flexibility into the timeline. But there's a difference between flexibility and unpredictability. Right now, no one can plan around your deliverables because no one, including you, knows when they'll be completed. I want a plan to improve reliability." Marcus slid a document across the desk. "I need this feature completed by Friday at 5 p.m. Not 80% completed. Not brilliantly reimagined, but incompatible with everything else. Completed, tested, and integrated. And if inspiration doesn't strike by your arbitrary deadline," Zach challenged. "Then I will reassign it," Marcus said simply. "Which means you won't get to work on the components that connect to it, the ones I know you're actually most interested in." Zach's eyes narrowed. "You're threatening to take me off my architecture?" "Not threatening, I'm explaining the natural consequence of missed deadlines," Marcus corrected. "You're brilliant, Zach. No one disputes that. But Prisma needs reliability as much as brilliance." The session with Zach set the pattern for the others that followed. With Maya, Marcus acknowledged her exceptional attention to detail while making it clear that shipping was non-negotiable, even if the product wasn't perfect by her standards. "Perfect is the enemy of done," he told her. "I need your components functional by the deadline, even if they don't meet your ideal standards. We can refine after the initial integration." "That's not how quality work happens," she protested. "You can't just patch things together and hope for the best." "I'm not suggesting that," Marcus replied. "I'm suggesting we meet basic functionality first, then enhance iteratively. If you can't work that way, I'll need to reassign portions of your components to guarantee timely delivery." The conversation with Ravi centered on his tendency to take on others' work rather than hold them accountable. "You can no longer accept work from other team members without my explicit approval," Marcus instructed. "Your desire to help is admirable, but it's creating dependencies that undermine the team's growth." "But if they need help," Ravi began. "Then they should come to me," Marcus finished for him. "Your job isn't to rescue everyone, Ravi. It's to complete your assignments excellently and help others learn to do the same." Jen's session focused on her minimal communication. "You need to provide substantive updates or meet with me daily," Marcus informed her. "Your institutional knowledge is valuable and it can't stay locked in your head." Finally, with Tyler Chase, Marcus addressed the unilateral changes to specifications. Innovation is crucial, he acknowledged, but it needs to happen within defined parameters or through proper change request channels. You can work within the system or transfer to the conceptual design team, where blue sky thinking is the primary objective. Each conversation followed the same structure: clear acknowledgement of strengths, direct identification of problematic behaviors, specific requests for change, and defined consequences if those requests weren't met. Marcus maintained his emotional watchtower throughout each session, neither defensive when challenged, nor apologetic when setting limits. By late afternoon, he felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. The conversations had been uncomfortable but surprisingly productive. Each team member had pushed back initially, testing his resolve, but when they recognized he wouldn't be moved, most had shifted to problem-solving mode. As he packed up to leave, Janet appeared in his doorway. "How did the alignment sessions go?" "About as expected," Marcus replied. Initial resistance followed by reluctant engagement. Janet studied him with newfound interest. "You seem different, more centered." "I'm learning," he said simply. "Whatever you're learning, keep at it. This is the most clarity I've seen from your team since you took over." She turned to leave, then paused. "Dr. Mercer's methods seem to be working for you." Before he could formulate a response, she was gone, leaving Marcus to wonder just how much Janet knew about his sessions and their dual application. On the drive home, Marcus reflected on what felt like a pivotal day in his personal and professional life. He had maintained boundaries despite significant resistance, delivered candor without cruelty, and remained in his emotional watchtower even when the storms intensified. The wooden lighthouse sat on his dashboard, catching the late afternoon sunlight. Marcus knew the challenges were far from over. Vanessa would test these new boundaries again, likely with more sophisticated tactics. His team would push back in ways he hadn't anticipated. The real test wasn't establishing boundaries, but maintaining them consistently over time. Yet, for the first time in months, he felt a profound sense of agency, not over others, but over himself. He was no longer a reactive piece being moved across someone else's board, but an active player in a game whose rules he was finally beginning to understand. As he pulled into his driveway, Marcus noticed Vanessa's car already there. Tonight would bring new tests, new challenges, and new opportunities to practice what he was learning. The thought didn't fill him with dread as it once would have. Instead, he felt ready, not for conflict, but for clarity. The candor and consequences he had delivered today weren't about winning or controlling. They were about building relationships based on reality rather than accommodation, on mutual respect rather than manipulation. With the lighthouse in his pocket, he walked toward his front door, prepared to continue the most important game he would ever play. Chapter 9. Predicting the Weather. In every game of strategy, there comes a moment when the board reveals not just the current state of play, but patterns that predict moves yet to come. Dr. Mercer arranged her game pieces with the precision of a surgeon, her silver asymmetrical bob catching the afternoon light that slanted through the blinds. The shadows cast by her movements danced across the polished surface of the table. Today's selection was Go, an ancient strategy game in which black and white stones claimed territory in a dance of elegant simplicity that belied its infinite complexity. Each placement altered the entire landscape, not in dramatic upheavals, but in subtle shifts that accumulated until a new reality emerged. "The past 2 weeks have been instructive," she observed, placing a black stone at a key intersection with a soft click against the wooden board. "Tell me what you've noticed." Marcus studied both the game and his meticulously kept notes before responding. The carved wooden lighthouse now sat beside him during their sessions. No longer just an object, but almost a silent participant, what Dr. Mercer had called an anchor to centered awareness. Its presence steadied him, a physical reminder of the emotional distance he was learning to maintain. "Patterns," he said finally, tasting the word before elaborating. Both at home and at work, I'm seeing responses to boundary enforcement that are so predictable they're almost algorithmic. Dr. Mercer's eyes flickered with approval. Say more. With Vanessa, there's a clear sequence, like code executing in precise order. He leaned forward, animated by his own insight. First comes disbelief, as if she can't comprehend that I'm actually maintaining a boundary. Her eyes widen, her voice gets that slight tremor. Then comes anger when she realizes I'm serious. Sharper tone, accusations, attempts to make me the villain. Then, a period of withdrawal. The silent treatment, separate sleeping arrangements, pointed sighs. When that arsenal fails, she shifts to what I can only describe as love bombing. Sudden affection, thoughtful gestures, reminiscences about our early relationship that appear from nowhere. Like she's back in recruitment mode. And when that sophisticated strategy fails to erode your boundaries, Dr. Mercer prompted, her focus absolute. She pivots to health concerns, Marcus said, the realization crystallizing fully as he articulated it. Headaches appear when I'm on an important work call. Mysterious pains that peak just before planned outings with friends. Anxiety attacks that require my immediate attention and care, conveniently timed to conflict with commitments she's already attempted to undermine through other means. He placed a white stone on the board, attempting to secure territory while maintaining flexibility. The smooth piece felt cool against his fingertips. Dr. Mercer immediately responded with a black stone that threatened his position from an unexpected angle. The move was deceptively simple, devastatingly effective. You've described the weather patterns, she noted. How have you navigated these storms? By climbing my watchtower, Marcus replied, unconsciously straightening his posture. I've used her silent treatment as an opportunity to enjoy peaceful evenings pursuing my own interests, reading books I've been meaning to get to, reaching out to old friends. I've appreciated the affection and gestures without abandoning my boundaries, acknowledging them with genuine thanks but maintaining the limits I've set. I've responded to health concerns with appropriate care, even driving her to a doctor once when she claimed chest pain, but without dropping other commitments when it became clear there was no medical emergency. And at work? The same principles in a different arena? Similar patterns, tailored to each personality. Marcus referenced his notebook, where he'd documented the team's responses in precise detail. Zach tested me by delivering brilliant work at literally the last possible minute of the deadline, 11:59 p.m., with a note saying, as requested. When I acknowledged the quality but maintained that future work needed to arrive during business hours for proper integration, he went through his own version of disbelief, anger, and testing, like a condensed version of Vanessa's playbook. And Maya? She submitted work she considered substandard with passive-aggressive notes about reduced quality to meet arbitrary deadlines. When the client praised the implementation, I watched her face. She seemed genuinely shocked that good enough for now didn't end her career or reputation. There was this moment where her entire worldview seemed to tremble. Dr. Mercer placed another stone, subtly shifting the game's dynamics. The click it made against the board punctuated her question. And the others? Ravi has struggled the most, Marcus admitted, feeling genuine compassion beneath his analysis. He physically flinches when redirecting people to proper channels instead of handling their problems himself. I caught him twice secretly helping team members after hours, his face a mask of conflicted loyalty. We're working on his understanding that enabling isn't the same as helping, that rescuing people from consequences doesn't serve their growth. Jen has realized I'll simply keep asking follow-up questions until I get substantive information, so she's begun providing slightly more detailed updates from the start. Efficiency winning out over resistance. Her eyes still avoid mine, but the data flows more freely. And Tyler Chase? The most unpredictable, Marcus said with a slight smile. He alternates between sullen compliance, arms crossed, jaw tight, and genuinely useful innovation within parameters. When his ideas improve the product without derailing timelines, I recognize his contribution publicly. Sometimes I catch him fighting a pleased expression, as if accepting praise for playing by rules offends his self-image as a maverick. Dr. Mercer studied the Go board, where complex patterns had emerged from their simple, alternating placements. Black and white territories intermingled in an intricate dance of influence and control. She traced a finger along one boundary line without touching the pieces. "What you're witnessing are extinction bursts," she explained, her voice taking on the quality it made when sharing foundational concepts. When a behavior stops producing its usual reward, things can get intense when they lose control over you. It's the child who screams louder when parents stop giving in to tantrums, the gambler who increases bets during a losing streak, the addict who takes larger doses when tolerance builds. She placed another stone with quiet precision, capturing one of Marcus's pieces and removing it from the board. "These extinction bursts feel like failures of your approach." "They're not. They're evidence it's working." "It doesn't always feel like it's working," Marcus admitted, watching his captured stone disappear into her wooden bowl. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just creating more conflict, making everything worse." "You're not creating conflict," Dr. Mercer corrected, her tone gentle but firm. "You're simply no longer absorbing it silently. There's a critical difference." She gestured to the Go board between them. "The game was always being played. You've become an active participant rather than a captured piece." They continued playing as Marcus described specific incidents from the past 2 weeks. As his examples multiplied, the stones accumulated on the board, and black and white territories took shape like islands in an archipelago. There had been a theatrical evening when Vanessa had claimed to be too dizzy to drive home from a work event, on the night of his important presentation to Janet. The timing had been too perfect to be coincidental. He'd arranged an Uber for her without canceling his commitment, watching her face cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally, calculation as she realized her strategy had failed. He'd endured 3 days of silent treatment afterward, the apartment filled with the sound of pointedly closed doors and exaggerated sighs, using the time to catch up on books he'd been wanting to read. At work, Zach attempted to bypass the project management system by submitting directly to Janet, his digital fingerprints all over the maneuver. Janet, having been briefed by Marcus, redirected him back to proper channels with a CC to Marcus that carried its own message. Maya had created an elaborate presentation on the technical debt accumulated through rushed implementation, only to have the executive team praise the current approach of shipping on time and improving iteratively. Throughout these tests, Marcus maintained his watchtower perspective, acknowledging the emotional weather without being swept away by it, delivering consequences with care rather than retribution. The most challenging aspect, he confessed, capturing one of Dr. Mercer's stones in a rare successful maneuver, is maintaining consistency when I see small improvements. There's a temptation to relax boundaries at the first sign of change, to reward even minimal compliance with excessive gratitude. That's exactly when boundaries are most crucial, Dr. Mercer said, countering his move with one that again transformed the board's dynamic. Intermittent reinforcement, unpredictable patterns of giving in, creates the strongest behavioral patterns. It's why gambling is so addictive. The occasional win keeps the player pulling the lever despite consistent losses. She captured several more of his stones with a strategic placement that Marcus hadn't anticipated, her fingers nimble and certain. Consistency doesn't mean rigidity, she clarified. It means predictability. Your responses should be reliable without being robotic, human but not manipulable. As they approached the end of their session, Dr. Mercer introduced a new element to their discussion. The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the board, highlighting some territories while obscuring others. "You've navigated the extinction burst admirably," she said, her tone carrying a note of genuine approval. "Now watch for small shifts that indicate potential adaptation." "Like what?" Marcus asked, leaning forward slightly. At home, moments where Vanessa engages on your terms rather than attempting to control the interaction. At work, instances where team members fulfill expectations without requiring enforcement. Dr. Mercer's eyes met his directly. These aren't surrenders, they're experiments in new ways of relating. Test to see if the new rules might be playable. Should I acknowledge these shifts? Marcus asked, uncertain how to respond to potential positive changes without undermining the boundaries he'd worked so hard to establish. Absolutely, but without excessive praise that suggests you're surprised by basic respect, Dr. Mercer advised. Simple acknowledgement reinforces the new pattern without overinflating its significance. Thank you for joining us carries more weight than, I'm so thrilled you finally decided to participate appropriately. Their game concluded with Dr. Mercer's victory, a result Marcus had expected but fought diligently to prevent. The board told the story of their contest, territories claimed, defended, and ultimately lost or secured. As they cleared the pieces, returning black and white stones to their respective bowls, she offered her final observation of the session. Weather patterns appear chaotic at the moment, but reveal predictable systems when viewed over time, she said, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. The skills you're developing aren't about controlling the weather, but recognizing patterns early enough to prepare effectively. Not manipulating people, but understanding them well enough to maintain your center regardless of their behavior. The following Thursday brought a moment that, while small, felt significant enough that Marcus noted it carefully in his journal, his pen moving across the paper with deliberate strokes. Game night was proceeding as usual, the familiar rhythm of rules explained, strategies employed, victories celebrated, and when Vanessa arrived home at 7:15, earlier than her typical workday but still after the official start time. Instead of the passive-aggressive commentary he'd grown accustomed to, "Oh, already started without me, I see," she hung her coat with unhurried movements, greeted everyone with a warmth that seemed genuine rather than performative, and asked, "Where are you in the game? Can I jump in the next round?" Marcus maintained his watchtower, noting the internal surge of pleasure and cautious optimism, without being carried away by it. The wooden lighthouse in his pocket seemed to warm slightly against his leg. "We're about halfway through," he replied evenly. "Should finish in 20 minutes or so. There's snacks in the kitchen if you're hungry." "Perfect," she replied, her tone lacking the tight edge that typically underscored her interactions. "I'll grab something to eat and watch this round." She did exactly that, observing the game with what appeared to be genuine interest, asking occasional questions about strategy, and joining seamlessly for the next round. No attempts to shift focus to herself. No subtle digs about Marcus's obsession with games. No suggestions to switch to something she preferred. It wasn't a transformation. There were moments of the old patterns, a flash of irritation when she lost a round, a slightly too loud laugh when she won that drew attention her way. But for nearly 2 hours, she participated without attempting to control, engaged without dominating, present without performing. When their friends left, Marcus expected the facade to drop, the pleasant demeanor to evaporate like morning mist under the harsh sun. Instead, Vanessa simply helped clean up, her movements relaxed rather than pointed, and said, "That was fun. I'd forgotten why we used to enjoy these nights." "You're welcome to join anytime," Marcus replied evenly, neither over-enthusiastic nor suspicious, maintaining his emotional equilibrium despite the unexpected positive shift. "I might," she said, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Part curiosity, part calculation, part something that might have been respect. "You seem, I don't know, more yourself lately." "I am," he confirmed with a shrug, offering nothing more, neither defending nor elaborating. The moment wasn't a reconciliation or a breakthrough. It was smaller than that, yet somehow more substantial. A tiny experiment in a different way of relating. A tentative step onto new terrain. Like a single stone placed on the go board that might, several moves later, prove to be pivotal. A similar shift occurred during the Friday team meeting in the glass-walled conference room, where they'd previously engaged in so many battles disguised as discussions. What typically began with Marcus having to extract updates like pulling teeth instead, flowed with surprising efficiency. Zach reported his progress without minimizing the remaining work, and his usual slouch was less pronounced as he referenced actual completion metrics. Maya acknowledged quality compromises but focused on solutions rather than complaints, her rigid posture softening slightly when her approach received approving nods. Ravi stayed within his lane rather than reporting on everyone else's work, his hands remaining still rather than reaching metaphorically for others' responsibilities. Jen provided actual details without requiring multiple follow-up questions, making eye contact briefly before returning to her notes. And Tyler presented a creative enhancement that worked within existing parameters rather than requiring system redesign. His usual combative stance was replaced by something more collaborative. Janet, present for this meeting, raised an eyebrow at Marcus when the team dispersed, a silent acknowledgement of the noticeable change. Her expression carried both surprise and approval. "They're adapting," she observed as they walked back to his office, their footsteps echoing in the corridor. "Slowly," Marcus agreed, tempering optimism with realism. "It's not consistent yet." "It never is with creative teams," Janet said, "but they're responding to clear leadership with clear consequences. Keep at it." That afternoon, as Marcus organized his notes and observations to prepare for his next session with Dr. Mercer, he reflected on these small shifts. They weren't victories in the traditional sense, not surrenders or capitulations from either Vanessa or his team. They were exploratory moves in a continuing game, tentative adjustments to a changed dynamic, and tests to see if the new rules might yield better outcomes for all players. The wooden lighthouse sat on his desk, its carved details catching the late afternoon light that streamed through his office window. A reminder of the perspective that had made these shifts possible. Whatever storms might come next, and he had no illusion that clear weather would last, he now had both a watchtower from which to observe them and an understanding of their patterns that allowed him to prepare rather than merely react. He carefully packed away his notes and the lighthouse, securing them in his messenger bag, ready for the next session, the next game, the next application of principles that were gradually transforming his approach to difficult relationships. The work wasn't finished, perhaps it never would be, but for the first time, Marcus felt like a player rather than a piece, a weatherman rather than a victim of storms he couldn't predict. In both the game at home and the game at work, the board had shifted, subtly but unmistakably, toward patterns that offered new possibilities for all involved. It was not a new game entirely, but perhaps a more skillful way of playing the games he now understood. Chapter 10. The Balance Beam. True wisdom in a game emerges not from executing the final stroke of victory, but from recognizing the immutable constraints that shaped the battlefield. "No game today?" Marcus asked as he met Dr. Mercer at the entrance to Harmony Gardens, a botanical sanctuary on the outskirts of town known for its elaborate stone labyrinth. The late morning sun filtered through maple leaves, casting dappled shadows across the path before them. Dr. Mercer adjusted her wide-brimmed hat against the sunlight. Her silver asymmetrical bob caught the light as she shook her head. "We've been playing games for weeks. Today we walk and talk. Some truths emerge more clearly while in motion." The labyrinth stretched before them. Not a maze designed to confuse, but a single winding path that inevitably led to the center through twists and turns. Stone walls lined with flowering shrubs created the boundaries of the path, rising just high enough to guide without obstructing the view of the journey ahead. The scent of lavender and rosemary hung in the still air. "Appropriate setting for our final principle," Dr. Mercer observed as they walked the outer circuit. "Eyes wide open courage." "Final principle," Marcus echoed, surprise evident in his voice. "We've covered awareness and acceptance of what is. We've established boundaries with gates you control. We've built your emotional watchtower. We've balanced consequences with care." She counted each principle on her fingers as they walked, her silver rings catching the sunlight. The final element is having the courage to face the hardest truths with eyes wide open. They rounded the first bend of the labyrinth, their path turning back on itself while still moving generally inward. The metaphor wasn't lost on Marcus. He ran his fingers along the carved lighthouse in one pocket, the small brass scale in the other, touchstones of his journey. "What kinds of truths?" he asked, though part of him already knew. "The ones you've been approaching obliquely," Dr. Mercer replied. "The ones that live at the core of your challenges." They walked silently for several moments, the rhythmic pattern of their steps creating a meditative backdrop for difficult thoughts. A butterfly danced across their path, wings flashing brilliant blue before disappearing over the stone wall. "Vanessa may never change fundamentally," Marcus said finally, giving voice to the understanding that had been forming within him for weeks. His words hung in the warm air between them. "The patterns we've identified, the control mechanisms, the radical shift in her personality after the wedding, the emotional manipulation, the prioritization of her needs above all else, aren't just behaviors she's chosen. They're deeply ingrained aspects of her personality that rarely change." Dr. Mercer nodded, her expression neither confirming nor denying, simply acknowledging his articulation of this reality. "I've seen some changes in her," Marcus continued as they navigated another turn in the path. "Small adjustments, moments of genuine connection, but they're islands in a sea of troubling patterns. And even those adjustments come with calculation, cost-benefit analyses rather than fundamental shifts in perspective that lead to trust." "And what does that mean for your marriage?" Dr. Mercer asked, her tone neutral but probing. "That's the question I've been avoiding," Marcus admitted, watching a trail of ants march determinedly across the pathway, each following the other in perfect formation. "If these patterns are who she fundamentally is rather than her choices, then my options narrow considerably. I can establish and maintain boundaries, yes. I can develop emotional resilience, certainly. But I cannot transform her into someone with fundamentally different values and instincts." They reached a point where the path seemed to bring them tantalizingly close to the center of the labyrinth, only to curve away again toward the outer edges. Marcus paused, taking in the view of their winding journey. Eyes wide open. "Courage isn't about fearlessness," Dr. Mercer explained as they resumed walking. "It's about seeing clearly while still moving forward. In a way, TI brings all the other principles together in unity. Many people achieve clear vision only to become paralyzed by what they see. Others move forward blindly, colliding with reality repeatedly because they refuse to see what's before them." "I've done both," Marcus acknowledged. "Paralysis in my marriage, blind movement with my team." "And now?" "My team presents a similar truth," he said, stopping to examine a small purple flower growing improbably from a crack in the stone wall. "Zach will always prioritize creative brilliance over reliability. Maya will always struggle with perfectionism. Ravi will always tend toward conflict avoidance. Jen will always default to minimal communication. Tyler will always push boundaries with his innovations. I can create systems that channel these tendencies more productively, but cannot fundamentally change who they are." They walked several more turns in thoughtful silence, each twist in the path seemingly bringing them closer to the center, only to veer away again, a physical manifestation of approaching difficult truths. "There's a liberation in this understanding," Marcus continued finally. "When I stop expecting Vanessa to become someone she's not, I can make clearer decisions about what I'm willing to accept. When I stop expecting my team to transform into ideal employees, I can create more effective structures that work with who they are." "The prison of expectation," Dr. Mercer noted, as a breeze stirred her silver hair. "We suffer most when we demand reality conform to our wishes rather than adapting our approach to reality." They rounded another bend, and the labyrinth center came into view, not obscured this time, but still several turns away. A stone bench surrounded a small reflecting pool where sunlight danced across the surface. "These insights are coming at the right time, Doctor," Mercer observed. Tell me about your upcoming presentation to the executive team. The sudden shift in topic momentarily disoriented Marcus until he recognized the connection. Janet has asked me to present our progress on Prisma. The original deadline is next week. And the reality of your situation. We're going to be approximately 3 weeks late on full functionality, Marcus admitted, the words tasting like bitter coffee on his tongue. We've made significant progress and overcome major obstacles, but we simply cannot deliver everything promised by the original deadline. How would you have handled this situation 3 months ago? Marcus considered the question honestly. I would have overpromised, assuring the executive team we could make the deadline with enough pressure and overtime. I would have avoided the hard truth at all costs, then scrambled desperately when reality proved me wrong. And now I'm preparing a presentation that acknowledges both our substantial progress and our remaining challenges. I'll propose a phased release, core functionality on the original date, full feature set 3 weeks later. I'll outline the specific obstacles we encountered, the solutions we've implemented, and the realistic timeline going forward. Dr. Mercer nodded approvingly. Eyes wide open, seeing clearly while moving forward. Not sugarcoating reality, but not becoming paralyzed by it either. They continued walking, the path winding ever closer to the center, though never in a straight line. The sound of water from the fountain at the heart of the labyrinth grew louder with each step. There's another conversation coming, Marcus said, his voice quieter. With Vanessa, a harder one. Tell me, Dr. Mercer encouraged, her hiking boots making soft impressions in the sandy path. I need to express my commitment to her and my clarity about what I can and cannot accept going forward. I've been maintaining boundaries for weeks now, but I haven't articulated the broader context. That these aren't temporary adjustments, but permanent requirements for our relationship to continue. A conversation requiring eyes wide open courage, Dr. Mercer observed. Exactly. I need to accept that she may choose to end our marriage rather than accept these terms. I need to move forward despite that risk, because the alternative is returning to patterns that were destroying me. They had reached the final approach to the center of the labyrinth. The path straightened briefly before making one last turn to the central circle, a small stone platform with a bench and a reflecting pool. The water mirrored the sky above, clouds drifting across its surface. What would you say to her? Dr. Mercer asked as they settled on the bench. Marcus had been rehearsing this conversation mentally for a week. That I love her and am committed to our marriage. That I also love myself enough to require mutual respect, honesty, and consideration. I understand that she may not be willing or able to meet these requirements consistently, and if that's the case, we need to discuss separation rather than continuing a destructive cycle. And if she responds with the typical pattern? Tears, accusations, promises? Then I'll maintain my watchtower perspective, acknowledge her feelings without being controlled by them, and gently redirect to the core issue. Not with coldness, but with clarity. Dr. Mercer studied him with an intensity he'd grown familiar with over their weeks of work together. The reflection pool cast dappled light across her face. You've come remarkably far in a relatively short time. I had an effective guide, Marcus replied with genuine appreciation. You had effective principles and the courage to apply them, she corrected. My role was merely to seed the concepts and provide a context for practice. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the gentle sound of the reflecting pool creating a peaceful backdrop. Marcus realized that he felt a profound sense of centered calm, not the absence of challenges, but a newfound capacity to face them without being destabilized. This brings us to another truth requiring eyes-wide-open courage, Dr. Mercer said finally. Our formal sessions are concluding. Though not entirely unexpected, given her reference to the final principle, the statement still surprised Marcus. Why now? Because you've acquired the core principles and demonstrated the ability to apply them across contexts, she explained. Continuing our formal arrangement would risk creating dependency rather than autonomy. The goal was never endless sessions, but effective integration of these concepts into your life. But what if new challenges arise that I don't know how to handle? Marcus asked, hearing a note of concern in his own voice that reminded him of earlier insecurities. Dr. Mercer smiled slightly, a rare expression that transformed her typically serious features. New challenges will absolutely arise, that's guaranteed. But you now have the principles to address them. The specific applications will vary, but the foundations remain consistent. See reality clearly. Establish appropriate boundaries. Maintain your emotional perspective. Balance consequences with care. Move forward with eyes wide open. She reached into her ever-present bag and withdrew a small wooden box, which she handed to Marcus. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay the objects that had accompanied their journey. The popsicle stick fence, the wooden lighthouse, the brass balance scale, and a new addition, a small Superman cape for moving forward with courage. Visual reminders of invisible principles, she said as he examined them. The fence for boundaries with gates you control, the lighthouse for your emotional watchtower, the scale for balancing consequences with care, and now the Superman cape for seeing clearly while moving forward. Eyes wide open courage. Marcus ran his fingers over the objects, each connected to insights that had transformed his approach to difficult relationships. Thank you, he said simply. The formal sessions end, but the work continues, Dr. Mercer replied. The games go on, but now you know the rules. You've moved from unconscious participant to conscious player. They began the journey back through the labyrinth, retracing their steps toward the entrance. The path was the same, but Marcus's perspective had shifted. He could now see how each turn, even those that seemed to lead away from the center, was an essential part of the journey. As they neared the exit, Dr. Mercer offered one final observation. Remember that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. When you have your conversation with Vanessa, when you make your presentation to the executive team, when you face the next unexpected challenge, you will feel fear. That's appropriate. Courage isn't about eliminating that feeling, but about preventing it from dictating your choices. They reached the labyrinth's exit, stepping back into the broader garden. Dr. Mercer extended her hand, which Marcus shook with deep gratitude. If you need a refresher session in the future, my door remains open, she said. But I suspect you'll find that the principles have become part of how you navigate the world, not techniques you apply, but lenses through which you see. As Marcus drove home, the wooden box of symbols secure beside him, he reflected on how profoundly his perspective had changed over these months. The circumstances of his life remained challenging. A marriage requiring constant vigilance, a team of brilliant but difficult personalities, and organizational pressures beyond his control. But his relationship to these challenges had transformed completely. He was no longer drowning in confusion and reactivity, but observing with clarity and responding with intention. He was no longer expecting reality to conform to his wishes, but adapting his approach to work effectively with what was. Most importantly, he was no longer avoiding difficult truths, but facing them with eyes wide open, seeing clearly while still moving forward. The conversation with Vanessa would be difficult. The presentation to the executive team would be challenging. The ongoing work of maintaining boundaries, perspective, and balance would require constant attention. But for the first time, Marcus felt genuinely equipped for the journey. Not because the path would be easy, but because he finally understood how to walk it. The most profound game he had learned wasn't about changing other people's moves, but about mastering his own. Chapter 11. Eyes Wide Open. Every master player knows that games are not won in moments of calm, but in the crucible of chaos when all carefully laid plans collide with unexpected reality. Marcus was reviewing the final Prisma test schedule in his office when Janet appeared in his doorway, her expression a mixture of urgency and tension that immediately set off warning bells in his mind. "Westlake wants changes," she said without preamble. Those 3 words sent a ripple of cold comprehension through Marcus. Westlake Industries was their largest client, the cornerstone account whose requirements had shaped Prisma from the beginning. The product was designed specifically for their industry, with the understanding that Westlake would be the flagship implementation before rolling out to smaller competitors. What kind of changes? Marcus asked, reaching for his notebook, where he'd documented each principle Dr. Mercer had taught him. The wooden box lay beside it, a reminder of all that he had learned. And when? Major navigation redesign and dashboard customization features, and they wanted included in the initial release. Janet stepped into his office, closing the door behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded ominous. Their CEO saw a competitor's product at a conference last weekend and called our CEO this morning. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Final testing was scheduled to begin tomorrow. The release was 3 weeks away, already a tight timeline his team had fought hard to maintain. That's impossible, he said flatly, not sugarcoating the reality. Even with everyone working around the clock, those features would take at least 6 weeks to implement and test properly. I know, Janet agreed, sinking into the chair across from his desk. But Westlake is threatening to pull out entirely if we don't accommodate them. $22 million in revenue would walk out the door. Marcus took a deep breath, mentally climbing his emotional watchtower as the implications cascaded through his mind. 6 months ago, he would have either promised the impossible or flatly refused without exploring alternatives. Now he recognized the need for a more nuanced approach. I need to see exactly what they're asking for, he said. Then we can determine what's possible within the time frame, what would require a separate release, and what we simply can't do at all. Janet nodded. There's a call with their technical team at 2 p.m. today. I want you on it. She studied him for a moment. This is exactly the kind of situation where your new approach will be tested. How are you planning to handle it? Marcus touched the small wooden box on his desk that contained his collection of symbolic objects from Dr. Mercer. With eyes wide open courage, I'll present the reality of our capabilities without either false promises or unnecessary negativity. Good, Janet said, rising to leave. That's what I was hoping to hear, as long as the truth doesn't lose their business. As she left, Marcus's phone buzzed with a personal message. He glanced down to see a text from Vanessa. We need to talk tonight. I've been doing a lot of thinking. The timing couldn't have been worse, or perhaps more perfect. The 2 most significant challenges in his life converged on the same day. He stared at the message for a long moment before replying. I'll be home by 7. You're right, we do need to talk. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and withdrew the small silver magnifying glass from the wooden box. Its weight was reassuring in his palm, a reminder that seeing clearly, even when the view was difficult, was the first step toward effective action. The call with Westlake's technical team revealed the full scope of the challenge. Their requested changes weren't simply cosmetic, they required fundamental alterations to Prisma's architecture. The navigation redesign would impact every screen in the application. The customization features would require a new permission system and database schema adjustments. As the Westlake team outlined their requirements with the casual entitlement of a client who viewed their size as leverage, Marcus maintained his emotional watchtower. He neither promised the impossible nor rejected their requests outright. Instead, he asked clarifying questions, took detailed notes, and explained the technical implications of each requirement. I understand the importance of these features, he said when they had completed their presentation. And I agree they would enhance Prisma's value proposition for your users. What I need to do now is analyze what's possible within the current release timeline and what would require a phased approach. That's not what we want to hear, Westlake's CIO replied bluntly. Our CEO was very clear. Either these features are in the initial release, or we're exploring other options. Marcus felt the familiar pressure to capitulate, to promise whatever would keep the client happy and worry about delivery later. From his emotional watchtower, he observed this pressure without being controlled by it. "I understand your position," he said calmly, "and I want to be absolutely transparent with you. Some of these features can be incorporated into the initial release with additional resources. Others would compromise product stability if rushed. I'd like to present a detailed feasibility analysis and implementation plan by tomorrow afternoon. That will give you concrete information to make your decision." There was a pause before the CIO responded. "Fine, but it better be compelling." As the call ended, Marcus looked up to find his entire team standing in the doorway of the conference room, having heard enough to understand the situation. Their expressions ranged from resignation to defiance. "Before anyone says it's impossible," Marcus began, holding up a hand, "I know. What I need from each of you is a clear assessment of what parts of these requests could be implemented in the original timeframe without compromising product integrity." To his surprise, the team didn't immediately revert to their old patterns of resistance. Instead, they moved into problem-solving mode, each bringing their unique strengths to bear on the challenge. Zach's creative brilliance generated alternative approaches to the navigation system. Maya's thoroughness identified the minimum quality requirements for each feature. Ravi focused on coordinating dependencies rather than trying to solve everything himself. Jen provided crucial historical information about similar challenges they'd faced, and Tyler channeled his innovation within the constraints rather than trying to redesign everything from scratch. By the end of the day, they had developed a 3-tiered implementation plan that would incorporate the most critical navigation changes in the initial release, deliver the basic customization framework 2 weeks later, and implement the advanced customization features in a third release a month after launch. "Will this be enough?" Ravi asked as they reviewed the final presentation. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but it's the truth. It's what we can actually deliver with confidence. Promising more would be setting all of us up for failure." Marcus arrived home at 6:50. The weight of the day was still heavy on his shoulders, but his mind remarkably clear. He found Vanessa waiting in the living room, sitting with unusual stillness on the edge of the sofa. The apartment was unnaturally tidy, as if she'd been cleaning to distract herself. "Thank you for coming home on time," she said formally, as if he were a visitor rather than her husband. "Of course," Marcus replied, taking a seat across from her. He placed the wooden box containing Dr. Mercer's symbols on the coffee table between them, a small act of intentionality. Vanessa's eyes flickered to the box before meeting his gaze. "I've been thinking about our marriage. About who we were when we met, who we are now, and who we seem to be becoming." Marcus nodded, waiting for her to continue, his hand resting lightly on the box. "The man I married would have come home immediately when I needed him," she said. "He would have prioritized my emotional needs above his work commitments. He would have ensured I never felt abandoned or secondary." "Marcus 1.0, Marcus acknowledged. "You're right, I was different then." "You've changed," Vanessa continued. "You talk about boundaries and perspectives and watchtowers. You no longer accommodate my needs the way you once did. You've become different in ways that don't serve our relationship." Marcus observed the familiar pressure to apologize, promise change, and revert to patterns that would preserve peace at the cost of his integrity. From his emotional watchtower, he recognized the impulse without being controlled by it. "I have changed," he agreed. "I've become clearer about who I am and what I need to thrive in relationships. That clarity has revealed incompatibilities in how we relate to each other, patterns that were slowly eroding my sense of self." "So this is my fault?" Vanessa's expression hardened slightly. "Fault?" Marcus replied calmly. "I was describing my view of our patterns. Patterns that worked for you but were damaging for me. Patterns I can no longer participate in without compromising my well-being. And if I need someone who is there for me?" The question hung between them, the core issue distilled to its essence. Marcus felt a profound sadness, but also a clarity that transcended the emotion. "I can't be the man I used to be. Then we've reached an impasse, he said gently. Because I cannot return to accommodating those patterns. Not won't, cannot. It would require me to abandon the self-awareness and boundaries that have been essential to my growth. Vanessa nodded slowly, as if his answer confirmed something she had already concluded. Then I need to be direct. I cannot stay in a marriage with this version of you. The Marcus I need is the one who prioritizes my needs above his own, who is man enough to make me his ultimate priority. Marcus ignored the insult, man enough, and tried to move back to the witness. Despite anticipating this moment, hearing the ultimatum spoken aloud sent a wave of grief through Marcus. Not for the marriage as it had been, a dynamic he now recognized as fundamentally unhealthy, but for the potential it had never realized, for the connection that might have been possible between two whole, committed individuals. I understand, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion. And I respect your clarity about what you need. I respect your choice. So, this is it, Vanessa said, a hint of surprise in her tone, as if she had expected him to capitulate even now. You're choosing your Marcus 2.0 over our marriage? I'm choosing authenticity and integrity, Marcus corrected gently. For both of us. Pretending I could return to old patterns would be dishonest and ultimately more harmful than acknowledging this fundamental incompatibility. They sat in silence for several moments, the finality of the conversation settling around them. There were practical matters to discuss: separation arrangements, financial considerations, what to tell friends and family. But those details seemed distant compared to the essential truth they had finally articulated. I did love you, Vanessa said eventually, a rare moment of vulnerability in her typically controlled presentation. Love? Bullying me like the new sheriff in town after we were married? Jesus, Vanessa, get help! Attacking my manhood when it suited your manipulative aims, claiming it was my fault you couldn't speak up, then lambasting me for being weak? Marcus shot back, clearly out of the tower and into the fray of the moment. Vanessa sat stunned at his anger, not sure what to say. You can only love in the way you understand love, Marcus offered as he calmed down, finding himself in the tower once again. I loved you in my way, giving in, taking the blame, apologizing, all the things I did as a child to keep the peace in a dysfunctional home that I thought would serve this marriage. We're both discovering that those patterns don't work, and I'm proud of the me that is growing. I make no apologies for who I'm becoming. Normally, Vanessa would have rekindled the argument, but something prompted her to shrug and say, "Yes, we're done." As they began discussing practical next steps, Marcus maintained his centered perspective. The grief was real, and the uncertainty of his future was profound. Yet beneath these turbulent emotions was also a current of peace. Not the peace of perfect circumstances, but the deeper peace of living in alignment with his principles, even when doing so carried significant costs. The next morning, Marcus presented the 3-tiered implementation plan to Westlake's executive team. He acknowledged the limitations of what could be delivered in the original timeframe while emphasizing the value of the phased approach. He was direct about the technical constraints, honest about the risks of rushed implementation, and transparent about the benefits of the proposed solution. When Marcus finished, Westlake's CEO bluntly said, "What you're offering isn't what we asked for." "It's what we can deliver with confidence," Marcus replied, neither defensive nor apologetic. "And I believe it serves your interests better than attempting to rush features that would compromise the stability of the platform you depend on." A tense silence followed. Marcus remained in his emotional watchtower, observing the pressure to backpedal without succumbing to it. "I appreciate the candor," the CEO said finally. "It's refreshing to hear what's actually possible rather than what you think I want to hear. More stable platform is vital. Let's move forward with your phased approach." Relief washed through Marcus, though he maintained his professional composure. When presented clearly and respectfully, the client accepted the truth. A validation of Dr. Mercer's principles in yet another context. When he returned to the office, Janet was waiting for his report. "How did it go?" she asked, unable to hide her anxiety. "They accepted the phased approach," Marcus said. "No compromises, no unrealistic promises." Janet's expression shifted from worry to relief to something approaching admiration. "When I first brought in Dr. Mercer, I thought she might help you manage your team more effectively. I didn't expect her principles to save our largest client relationship." "The principles apply across contexts," Marcus replied, echoing Dr. Mercer's words. "Professional, personal, and parental." "Well, whatever she taught you, it's working. The team is more cohesive, the deliverables are more predictable, and now even our most demanding client is on board with realistic expectations." Janet hesitated, then added, "Is everything okay?" "You seem different today. More resolved, but also somehow more vulnerable." Marcus considered how much to share about his personal situation. "Vanessa and I are separating," he said simply. "The same principles that helped me lead effectively made it clear that our relationship as it was couldn't continue." Janet's expression softened with genuine concern. "I'm sorry to hear that. That's a lot to carry while dealing with this client crisis." "Well, it's not as heavy as you might think," Marcus replied. "There's a relief in facing reality clearly, even when that reality is difficult. It's the avoidance, the denial, the pretending that weigh you down." As he said it, Marcus realized the profound truth in his own words. By facing the hardest realities in his marriage and his work, he had liberated himself from the exhausting labor of maintaining illusions. Eyes wide open. Courage wasn't just about seeing clearly. It was about the freedom that came from no longer having to pretend not to see. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the small silver magnifying glass. The symbol reminded him that clarity, however painful initially, was ultimately the path to genuine peace. Not the temporary peace of avoiding conflict, but the enduring peace of living in truth. The path forward wouldn't be easy, either professionally or personally. There would be difficult conversations, practical challenges, and moments of doubt. But for the first time, Marcus faced these not as insurmountable obstacles, but as natural terrain on a journey he now knew how to navigate. The most profound game, after all, wasn't about avoiding difficulty, but about moving through it with integrity and purpose, eyes wide open to both the challenges and the possibilities that lay ahead. Chapter 12. The Ultimate Test. The final victory in any game of consequence isn't measured by who remains standing with the trophy, but by the truths you can now face without flinching. 3 days after his conversation with Vanessa, Marcus stood at the window of his new apartment, watching rain streak across the glass in chaotic patterns. The space was sparsely furnished: a bed, a desk, a single bookshelf, and the kitchen essentials. But unlike the emptiness that had characterized his first bachelor apartment 13 years earlier, this minimalism felt intentional and purified, a blank canvas rather than a void. The wooden box containing Dr. Mercer's symbols sat open on the windowsill, each object catching the gray morning light. The popsicle stick fence, the wooden lighthouse, the brass balance scale, the Superman cape, and the silver magnifying glass. They were not just tokens now, but extensions of principles that had become part of his internal architecture. His phone vibrated against the countertop behind him. Janet's name appeared on the screen. "The board approved the Westlake contract amendments," she said without preamble when he answered. "3-phase implementation, exactly as you proposed. Full value retained." "That's excellent news," Marcus replied, watching a particular raindrop navigate a complex path down the window. "How did they take the timeline?" "Better than expected. Your transparency about the technical constraints enhanced our credibility. The CEO specifically mentioned that he appreciated dealing with a company that wouldn't promise what it couldn't deliver." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Turns out honesty is a competitive advantage. "In this case, absolutely," Janet agreed. Which brings me to the other reason for my call. The VP of product is stepping down at the end of the quarter. I've recommended you as his replacement. The statement hung in the air between them. 3 months ago, such an opportunity would have seemed impossible. A junior team leader drowning in the resistance of a problematic group, struggling to meet deadlines. Now it seemed, if not inevitable, then at least plausible. That's unexpected, Marcus managed, his mind racing to process the implications. Is it? Janet asked. You've transformed a dysfunctional team into a cohesive unit. You've saved our most valuable client relationship. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership the executive team has been searching for. Clarity without brutality. Accountability without rigidity. I appreciate the confidence, Marcus said, but there's something you should know before you push my name further. He took a deep breath. Dr. Mercer wasn't just helping me with team dynamics. She was helping me navigate my marriage as well, which has now ended. I'm in the middle of a separation that will likely lead to divorce. A brief silence followed. I know, Janet said finally. You know? Marcus, we've worked closely for over 2 years. Did you think I wouldn't notice the parallel struggles? The same patterns of avoidance and accommodation were evident in both spheres. I didn't realize I was that transparent, Marcus said, feeling oddly exposed. Not to everyone. But I've been where you are, both professionally and personally. It's part of why I connected you with Dr. Mercer in the first place. Janet's voice softened. The question isn't whether you're going through personal changes. The question is whether those changes have strengthened or weakened your leadership capacity. Marcus considered this, his fingers brushing against the silver magnifying glass on the windowsill. They've strengthened it, he said with quiet certainty. Clarity is clarity, whether you're dealing with a difficult team member or a difficult spouse. The principles are the same. That's been my observation as well, Janet confirmed. Think about the VP position. We can discuss details next week. After ending the call, Marcus returned his attention to the rain-streaked window. The promotion possibility was unexpected but not unwelcome. Yet it wasn't the career advancement that occupied his thoughts, but the realization that the principles Dr. Mercer had taught him were being recognized and valued beyond his immediate circle. His phone vibrated again. A text from Alex. Game night still on for Thursday? Your place or mine, dude? Marcus smiled, typing back, Absolutely. 7 p.m. I'll provide dinner. In the wake of his separation from Vanessa, Marcus had worried that social connections might erode. Instead, the opposite had occurred. Freed from the constant tension of her manipulations, game night had evolved into a genuine community. Even Zach and Maya had begun attending occasionally, their competitive personalities fitting surprisingly well with the established dynamics. The rain intensified, drumming against the window with renewed force. Marcus gathered the symbolic objects back into their wooden box, a ritual he performed each morning before heading to the office. He no longer needed to carry them physically. Their presence had become internal, guiding his responses to challenges both expected and unforeseen. The Prisma launch was scheduled for 9 a.m. Marcus arrived at the office at 6, reviewing the final checklist with the quiet intensity that had become his trademark. The team had delivered precisely what they had promised. Core functionality on the original date, with the first enhancement package already in testing for release 2 weeks later. Nervous? Zach asked, appearing at his office door with 2 cups of coffee and dark circles under his eyes that suggested an all-night coding session. Vigilant, Marcus corrected, accepting the offered cup. There's a difference. Zach dropped into the chair across from him. I finished the dashboard customization module. When Marcus raised an eyebrow, he added, Yes, at 4 a.m., and yes, it's been properly checked in and documented. That wasn't scheduled for completion until next week, Marcus noted. I know, but it's solid work, and it'll give us breathing room for the next release. Zach shrugged, attempting casual indifference, but unable to hide a hint of pride. Figured you'd appreciate one less thing to worry about. I do, Marcus acknowledged. Thank you. Zach shifted uncomfortably at the direct appreciation. Yeah, well, the new system works better than I expected. Clear parameters, but room to innovate within them. That was the goal, Marcus said. Structure without strangulation. Speaking of structure, Zach began, then hesitated. I heard about the VP position. Janet's pushing for you? News traveled fast in any organization. Marcus nodded, neither confirming nor denying. Good, Zach said decisively. You'd be better than whatever consultant they'd bring in from outside. It was perhaps the most straightforward compliment Zach had ever offered. Before Marcus could respond, Maya appeared in the doorway, her normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled from the launch preparations. Final quality metrics are green across all critical pathways, she announced. There are 17 minor issues flagged for post-launch resolution, all documented and prioritized. She handed Marcus a tablet with the detailed report. It's not perfect, but it exceeds industry standards for initial release. Nice work, Marcus said, noting the significance of Maya acknowledging imperfection without distress. The client will be impressed. They should be, she replied with characteristic confidence, though tempered now with a new self-awareness. We've delivered exceptional quality under compressed timelines. That doesn't happen without intelligent trade-offs. As she left, Ravi arrived with the deployment checklist, followed by Jen with the customer support documentation, and finally Tyler with the user experience metrics from the final testing phase. Each interaction revealed subtle but significant shifts in the team's dynamics. More direct communication, greater personal accountability, and increased willingness to acknowledge strengths and limitations. Dr. Mercer's principles, applied consistently over months, had transformed not just Marcus but the entire ecosystem around him. Not through manipulation or coercion, but through clarity, boundaries, emotional regulation, and balanced consequences. At 8:55, the team gathered in the main conference room for the launch. Janet stood at the front, addressing the expanded group that now included customer support, sales representatives, and executive observers. The Prisma project represents a significant evolution in how we deliver complex products, she began. Not just technologically, but methodologically. Under Marcus's leadership, the team has pioneered an approach that balances quality with pragmatism, innovation with reliability, individual brilliance with collaborative effectiveness. As she continued, Marcus observed the team's reactions, pride tempered with appropriate humility, confidence without arrogance. They had earned this moment through genuine growth, not just technical skill, but interpersonal maturity. At precisely 9 a.m., Zach executed the final deployment command. Screens around the room displayed the loading indicators, then the Prisma dashboard appeared. Clean, intuitive, responsive. A spontaneous round of applause broke out as the first user login was confirmed. Congratulations to the entire team, Janet concluded. Phase 1 successful. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. As the group dispersed, Marcus found himself alone at the conference table, watching the Prisma metrics scroll across the main screen. Launch day would be long, monitoring performance, addressing inevitable issues, and supporting the first wave of users. But the fundamental work, the transformation of both product and team, was complete. His phone vibrated with a text message. He expected customer feedback or a technical alert, but instead saw Vanessa's name. Signed the separation papers today. Lawyer will contact yours to arrange final details. Hope you're well. The message was remarkably straightforward. No emotional hooks, no manipulation attempts, no passive-aggressive undertones. Just a clean statement of fact and a simple courtesy. Whether this represented genuine growth or merely resignation to the new reality, Marcus couldn't know. What mattered was his response. Not to the text specifically, but to this chapter of his life closing. From his emotional watchtower, he observed the complex mixture of feelings. Relief that the legal process was proceeding smoothly, sadness for the potential that had never been realized, and gratitude for the clarity that had ultimately emerged from the pain. He accepted these feelings without being controlled by them, acknowledging their presence without amplifying them through resistance. "Thank you for letting me know," he wrote back. "Wishing you well also." Simple. Director. Neither cold nor falsely warm. A boundary maintained with care. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and returned his attention to the Prisma metrics, which continued to show stable performance across all indicators. Not a severity, one bug in sight. 2 journeys concluding simultaneously, his marriage and the product launch, each navigated with the same principles, each reaching its natural resolution. That evening, as sunset painted his new apartment in shades of amber and gold, Marcus received another unexpected message. This one from Dr. Mercer. "Congratulations on Prisma launch." Janet shared the news. "Available for that refresher session if needed, but suspect you're navigating effectively. Remember, courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it." Marcus smiled at her characteristic directness, even in text form. He crafted a response that he hoped would convey his gratitude without excessive sentimentality. "Thank you for the principles that made it possible. The games continue, but I understand the rules now." Moving forward with eyes wide open. He sent the message, then removed the symbolic objects from their wooden box, arranging them on the windowsill where the last light of day transformed them. The popsicle stick fence now casting a long shadow, the wooden lighthouse gleaming as if lit from within, plastic Superman cape, the brass scale balanced perfectly, the silver magnifying glass focusing a pinpoint of brilliant light on the wall. Physical reminders of invisible principles that had become the foundation of a new approach to life's most challenging relationships. Not magical solutions that eliminated difficulty, but practical tools that transformed how he engaged with that difficulty. The promotion possibility, the successful product launch, the clean conclusion to his marriage. None of these were endpoints, but merely milestones on a continuing journey. There would be new challenges, new difficult personalities, and new situations requiring discernment and courage. But for the first time, Marcus felt genuinely equipped for whatever came next. Not because the path would be easy, but because he now understood how to walk it. Not because he could control outcomes, but because he could control his responses to those outcomes. Not because he could change others, but because he had fundamentally changed himself. The true victory wasn't in dominating the game, but in playing it with integrity, clarity, and purpose. A game no longer defined by others' rules, but by principles that would sustain him through whatever moves lay ahead. As darkness fell, Marcus turned from the window to face his new life. Not with blind optimism or rigid certainty, but with eyes wide open courage, ready for the next chapter to begin. That chapter would crash his life in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Chapter 13. Shadow Games. The most dangerous opponent isn't the one who stands before you in plain sight, but the one moving in the periphery of your awareness, patient and calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The call came at 2:17 a.m., yanking Marcus from a dreamless sleep. He fumbled for his phone in the darkness, his mind still caught in the foggy borderland between consciousness and oblivion. Marcus Winters. The voice was clinically professional, female, and unfamiliar. "Yes?" He sat up, instantly alert, that sixth sense that recognizes the cadence of bad news already prickling along his spine. "This is Dr. Samuels from Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling about Vanessa Wayland. She's been admitted to our emergency department." A cold weight settled in Marcus's chest. "What happened?" "Is she?" "She's stable," the doctor interrupted, her tone softening slightly. "But she took a significant quantity of prescription medication with alcohol. She's asked that we contact you." Marcus closed his eyes, processing this information from his emotional watchtower, observing the cascade of reactions within himself. Concern, guilt, suspicion, resignation. Dr. Mercer's training allowed him to acknowledge each feeling without being swept away by any of them. I understand, he said finally. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Mr. Wayland, the doctor added before he could disconnect, I should inform you that the police will want to speak with you as well. The police? The cold weight in his chest solidified. Why would they? There was a note that Vanessa left. The standard procedure requires an investigation in these circumstances. Marcus sat motionless after ending the call, staring into the darkness of his apartment. 3 months of clean separation. Final papers signed. The Prisma launch was a stunning success. Everything was moving forward with a clarity and purpose he'd never experienced before. And now this, Vanessa's final countermove in a game he thought had concluded. He dressed methodically, his mind cataloging possibilities and preparing responses, not just to doctors and police, but to the more insidious threat, his own potential backslide into old patterns of guilt and accommodation. The brass scale from Dr. Mercer's box flashed in his mind's eye. Balance is essential even now, especially now. Mercy General's emergency department buzzed with the particular tension of night shift medicine. The fluorescent harshness, the controlled urgency, the quiet desperation of those waiting for news of loved ones. At the reception desk, Marcus identified himself and was immediately approached by a compact man with salt and pepper hair and the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. Mr. Wayland? Detective Morris, County Police. He extended a hand. I appreciate you coming in so promptly. Marcus shook the offered hand. Of course, how can I help? Let's find somewhere quiet to talk. The detective guided him to a small consultation room off the main waiting area and closed the door behind them. Your wife is physically stable, Morris began without preamble. The doctors have pumped her stomach and administered activated charcoal. She'll recover, medically speaking. I'm glad to hear that, Marcus said, meaning it despite everything. The detective placed a clear evidence bag on the table between them. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting unmistakably Vanessa's elegant cursive. This was found beside her. I'd like you to read it. Marcus took the bag, a sense of dread blooming as he read the words. Marcus, I can't continue living with what you've done. The emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the isolation from my friends and family. You've systematically destroyed my self-worth while presenting a perfect face to the world. No one would believe the truth about you. I don't want to live in a world where you walk away unscathed while I'm left in pieces. At least this way, people will finally see you for what you really are. Vanessa. The word struck with precision, targeting the exact vulnerabilities she knew existed within him. The fear of being misunderstood, the concern about perception, the deep-seated worry that perhaps he had somehow failed her. Classic Vanessa, weaponizing his empathy against him and projecting like a true narcissist. But something had changed in Marcus, where once these words would have sent him spiraling into anger and defensive self-recrimination, now he observed them with a strange detachment. Not emotional numbness, but clarity. From his watchtower, he could see the tactical nature of the assault without being wounded by it. I understand this looks concerning, Marcus said calmly, returning the note to the detective. And I appreciate you doing your job. But there's context you should be aware of. Detective Morris studied him with practiced neutrality. I'm listening. My wife and I separated 3 months ago. The divorce papers were finalized yesterday, which you can verify with our attorneys. Marcus maintained steady eye contact. During our marriage, Vanessa exhibited patterns consistent with emotional manipulation. I sought professional help to navigate this dynamic, which is documented through my sessions with Dr. Valerie Mercer, a specialist in high-conflict relationships. The detective's expression remained unchanged, but Marcus sensed a slight shift in his posture. Not quite relaxation, but a subtle recalibration. There's also this, Marcus continued, retrieving his phone and pulling up his text message exchange with Vanessa from the previous day. He handed the phone to Morris. This was our last communication, less than 12 hours ago. The detective read the brief, amicable exchange about the finalized papers, his eyebrows lifting almost imperceptibly. Not exactly consistent with the tone of the note, Morris observed, returning the phone. No, Marcus agreed. It's not. Would you say your wife has a history of dramatic gestures when she doesn't get her way? The question was a potential trap. Painting Vanessa as unstable could suggest a motive for emotional abuse on Marcus's part. The old Marcus might have rushed to defend Vanessa or desperately asserted his innocence. The new Marcus recognized the situation's complexity and the need for balanced truth. What I can say with certainty is that throughout our relationship, moments of significant change often triggered crisis responses from Vanessa, he replied carefully. I'm not qualified to diagnose or label those responses. I can only speak to the pattern. Detective Morris nodded slowly, making a brief note in his small black notebook. Fair enough. The hospital psychiatrist will evaluate her once she's fully conscious. In the meantime, I'll need contact information for your attorney and this doctor. Mercer. Marcus provided the information, feeling a strange calm despite the circumstances. Dr. Mercer's voice echoed in his memory. The ultimate test isn't whether you can avoid crisis, but maintain your principles during one. Can I see her? Marcus asked as they concluded. The detective considered this. Medically, they've cleared visitors. Legally, there's no restriction at this point. He gave Marcus a measuring look. Are you sure that's wise? Probably not, Marcus admitted, but necessary. Vanessa looked smaller somehow against the stark white hospital linens, her normally perfect appearance disheveled, vulnerability replacing her characteristic poise. For a moment, Marcus felt the old pull, the instinct to comfort, to fix, to accommodate whatever was needed to restore peace. But as he settled into the chair beside her bed, he remained anchored to his watchtower, compassionate yet clear-eyed. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing gradually on his face. A complex sequence of emotions crossed her features. Surprise, relief, calculation, and finally, a practiced fragility. You came, she whispered, her voice raspy from the intubation. Of course I did, Marcus replied simply. Did they show you my note? Yes. A beat of silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken dynamics. In the past, Marcus would have rushed to fill this void, to reassure or defend or explain. Now he waited, observing without reacting. Aren't you going to say anything? Vanessa finally asked, a hint of her old impatience breaking through the fragile facade. What would you like me to say, Vanessa? Her eyes narrowed slightly. That you're sorry. That you didn't realize how much you hurt me. That maybe we could... I am sorry you're in pain, Marcus interrupted gently but firmly. Genuinely. But I won't accept responsibility for things I haven't done, and I won't make promises I can't keep. Vanessa's expression hardened, the vulnerability vanishing like a mask being removed. They'll investigate you, your precious career, your VP promotion. All of it could disappear. Maybe that's possible, Marcus acknowledged. Actions have consequences, yours and mine. I will destroy you, you arrogant prick, she hissed, abandoning all pretense now. We're just beginning to fight. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Do what you need to do. I'm just not playing that game anymore, Vanessa. Not because I don't care about you, I do, but because I don't give energy to toxic people or situations. So what now? You just walk away? Leave me here like this? No, Marcus said after a brief pause. I've arranged for Dr. Keene, she's the psychiatrist on call to meet with you. She can help connect you with ongoing support, which I'll ensure is covered by our insurance through the final divorce settlement. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. What happened tonight was serious, Vanessa. Not just legally, but as an indicator of your well-being. You deserve proper support. Something flashed in Vanessa's eyes. Anger, certainly, but beneath it, perhaps a glimmer of something else. Recognition, maybe. Or the first fragile seed of respect. I don't need your goddamn charity, she said, but the familiar venom was diluted, performative rather than genuine. Charity? Marcus replied. I see better times ahead for you, Vanessa. He stood, having said what he came to say. At the door he paused, turning back to meet her gaze one final time. I hope you find peace, Vanessa. I mean that sincerely. As he walked through the hospital corridors toward the exit, Marcus felt a curious lightness. Not joy. The situation was too grave for that. But the unmistakable clarity that comes from navigating a crisis without losing yourself in the process. Outside, the first hints of dawn were breaking over the city skyline, painting the eastern horizon in delicate shades of pink and gold. A new day. Complicated, certainly. Challenging, without question, but navigable with the tools he now possessed. His phone vibrated with an incoming call. Janet's name appeared on the screen. Marcus, I hate to call this early, but we have a situation with Prisma, she said when he answered, her voice tense with controlled urgency. Someone's attempting to breach the system. It's a sophisticated attack, targeting specifically the components your team developed. I need you at the office immediately. Of course. One crisis flowed seamlessly into the next, like a cosmic test of his newly developed resilience. I'm on my way, he replied, already changing direction toward the office instead of his apartment. Have Zach and the security team lock down external access points until I arrive. Already done, Janet confirmed. Marcus, there's something else. The attack patterns bear similarities to proprietary security protocols developed by Helix Systems. Marcus froze mid-stride. Helix Systems, their largest competitor, and Vanessa's employer for the past 5 years. That's quite a coincidence, he said carefully, the implications expanding in his mind like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Is it? Janet asked pointedly. The timing seems remarkably aligned with your divorce finalization. A familiar cold weight settled in Marcus's chest, but now accompanied by something new. Not panic or despair, but a clear-eyed determination. If Vanessa had indeed shared inside information with her employers, if this attack was coordinated with her hospital crisis to maximize vulnerability, that was simply another move in the game. A game he now understood how to play. I'll be there in 15 minutes, he told Janet. And Janet? Alert legal. We may need them before this is over. As he ended the call, Marcus touched his pocket where, out of habit, he had placed the small brass scale that morning. Dr. Mercer's symbol of balance. Not just balance between accommodation and assertiveness, but between past and future, between compassion and accountability. The sky continued to brighten as he walked toward his car, each step purposeful and measured. The path ahead was complex, potential corporate espionage, legal complications, and personal allegations. But for the first time in his life, Marcus moved toward these challenges not with dread, but with a steady resolve, his principles intact, his vision clear. The game continued, but now he wasn't just playing, he was competing. With eyes wide open courage, ready for whatever the next move might be. Chapter 14. Checkmate. Victory in life's most complex games isn't determined by who controls the most pieces, but by who understands the board perfectly and stays 3 moves ahead. The Prisma War Room, hastily assembled at 5:30 a.m., hummed with the controlled chaos of crisis management. 3 oversized monitors dominated the front wall, displaying cascading lines of code, system architecture diagrams, and real-time intrusion tracking metrics. The room smelled of coffee, stress, and the peculiar electric tension that accompanies genuine professional threats. Marcus stood at the center of it all, a calm nucleus around which the frenetic activity orbited. He'd come directly from the hospital, sleep-deprived and emotionally drained, yet operating with a clarity that surprised even him. "The attack is sophisticated but not unprecedented," Zach reported, his fingers moving across the keyboard with machine gun rapidity. "They're using a modified version of the Carson protocol to probe for vulnerabilities in our authentication framework." "The Carson protocol?" Marcus repeated, the significance landing with crystal clarity. "That's proprietary to Helix Systems." "Exactly," Zach confirmed, looking up with grim satisfaction. "There's no mistaking it. The encryption signatures are unique, like a fingerprint." "Can you repel it?" Janet asked, her voice tight with controlled concern. "We already have," Zach replied with uncharacteristic confidence. "What's happening now is more interesting. We've isolated the attack in a honeypot environment, a quarantined replica of our system. They think they're getting somewhere, but they're just revealing their methods. Every probe, every algorithm they deploy gets logged and analyzed." Marcus exchanged a meaningful glance with Janet. "So, we're gathering evidence." "Bulletproof evidence," Zach confirmed, a predatory gleam in his eye. "Corporate espionage leaves digital breadcrumbs that even the best hackers can't completely erase. And these hackers aren't nearly as good as they think." The conference room door opened, admitting a tall, angular woman with steel gray hair and the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to high-stakes litigation. "Carla," Janet greeted her with visible relief. "Thank you for coming in so early." Carla Reeves, the company's chief legal counsel, nodded briskly, her gaze sweeping the room before settling on Marcus. "I understand we have a situation that's both professional and personal in nature." Marcus met her appraising look with steady calm. "That's correct. And I want to be transparent about the potential conflict. My ex-wife works for Helix Systems as a public relations consultant. The divorce papers were finalized yesterday. Last night she attempted suicide, leaving a note with allegations of emotional abuse against me. This morning, our system was attacked using proprietary Helix protocols. He delivered this information dispassionately, neither minimizing the implications nor dramatizing them. From his emotional watchtower, Marcus could observe the complex interweaving of personal and professional crises without being consumed by either. Carla's expression remained neutral, but something like approval flickered briefly in her eyes. "You believe these events are connected?" "I believe they warrant investigation as potentially connected," Marcus clarified. "I'm not jumping to conclusions, but the timing and specificity suggest coordination rather than coincidence." "Smart distinction," Carla acknowledged, setting her briefcase on the conference table. "Here's where we stand legally. The attempted breach of our systems is straightforward corporate espionage, criminal and civil violations that we can pursue aggressively with the evidence you're gathering. The personal allegations are more nuanced, but potentially more damaging to you and the company if mishandled. I have documentation of my work with Dr. Valerie Mercer," Marcus offered. "She specializes in high-conflict relationships and has records of Vanessa's patterns of behavior." "Good, but insufficient on its own," Carla replied. "We need a comprehensive strategy that addresses corporate and personal dimensions without appearing to conflate them or engage in retaliatory action." Janet interjected, "The board meets tomorrow morning to formalize Marcus's promotion to VP. If there's even a whisper of domestic abuse allegations, regardless of merit..." "They'll table the decision indefinitely," Carla finished, nodding grimly. Marcus absorbed this reality without flinching. From his watchtower, he could see the tactical brilliance of Vanessa's move, timing her crisis to coincide with both the finalization of their divorce and his impending promotion, while simultaneously coordinating with Helix to strike at Prisma's most vulnerable moment. Classic strategy: attack from multiple angles simultaneously, overwhelming the opponent's ability to respond coherently to any single threat. But Vanessa had failed to account for one critical factor. Marcus was no longer the same man she controlled so easily, overwhelmed and reactive. He now possessed tools that transformed his understanding of the game entirely. "Here's what we're going to do," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that drew every eye in the room. "First, we continue gathering evidence on the cyber attack. Zach, I want complete documentation, timestamps, signature patterns, everything that definitively links these activities to Helix systems." Zach nodded, already turning back to his keyboard. "Janet, please get in touch with the board chair. I'd like to request a 48-hour delay on tomorrow's vote, citing a developing security situation that requires my direct oversight. Don't mention Vanessa or any personal matters." Janet raised an eyebrow. "You want to delay your own promotion?" "I want to approach it from a position of complete resolution rather than ongoing crisis," Marcus clarified. "The difference between 48 hours and indefinite suspension." "Smart," Carla murmured. "As for the personal allegations," Marcus continued, "I'll contact Detective Morris directly and provide full access to my communications with Vanessa, my sessions with Dr. Mercer, and any other relevant documentation. Transparency is our greatest advantage here." "That's risky," Carla cautioned. "You're opening yourself up to significant scrutiny." "The accusations are false," Marcus replied. "Scrutiny will ultimately reveal that. Resistance would only suggest otherwise." A profound silence settled over the room as the team absorbed his strategy and the unwavering clarity with which he delivered it. This wasn't bravado or desperation. It was the balanced confidence of someone seeing all dimensions of a complex situation with perfect clarity. "One more thing," Marcus added, his gaze moving from face to face around the table. "I need each of you to proceed as though both situations, the cyber attack and Vanessa's allegations, are entirely separate until proven otherwise. We don't assume conspiracy without evidence, even if the timing is suspicious." "Why?" Janet asked, genuinely curious. "Because assumption is the enemy of clarity," Marcus replied. "And right now, clarity is our greatest asset." As the team dispersed to execute their assignments, Marcus found himself alone with Janet in the conference room. Through the glass walls, he could see Zach directing a small army of security specialists, Maya organizing documentation protocols, Ravi coordinating with the customer support team to ensure no service disruptions. "You've built something remarkable here," Janet observed, following his gaze. "Not just a successful product, but a genuinely functional team. That doesn't happen by accident." "No," Marcus agreed. "It happens through intentional practice of principles that work, whether you're dealing with difficult personalities, complex projects, or personal crises." He smiled slightly. Dr. Mercer would be pleased to see her lessons applied so comprehensively. Janet studied him with a frank assessment. "You're not worried, are you? Not really?" "I'm concerned," Marcus corrected. "Appropriately concerned about legitimate threats. But worried? Number worry implies helplessness in the face of uncertainty. I'm not helpless, and the path forward isn't certain." "The board might not see it that way." "Then I'll help them see it more clearly," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Just as I've learned to see more clearly myself." The next 48 hours unfolded with the meticulous precision of a legal thriller's final act. The cyber attack evidence, compiled and verified by 3 independent security firms, established beyond reasonable doubt that Helix Systems had orchestrated a sophisticated attempt to breach Prisma's defenses. More damning still, the attack had specifically targeted components that had only been finalized in the weeks after Vanessa and Marcus had separated, information she couldn't have known through their marriage, but only through corporate espionage. Detective Morris closed his investigation into Vanessa's allegations with a formal finding of no evidence to support claims of emotional abuse. The hospital psychiatrist's evaluation, coupled with the contradictory evidence of amicable text exchanges immediately preceding her suicide attempt, painted a clear picture of manipulation rather than genuine crisis. Most surprising to Marcus was the call from Philip Chen, Helix Systems' CEO requesting a private meeting at a discreet location downtown. "I'll come straight to the point, Marcus," Chen said, after they were seated in a private room at the Morton Club. "Helix had no knowledge of Vanessa's personal actions regarding your separation and divorce. However, we authorized aggressive competitive intelligence gathering on Prisma's architecture." "Competitive intelligence gathering," Marcus repeated, the legal euphemism hanging in the air between them. Chen had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Lines were crossed. I won't pretend otherwise. When the extent became clear to our board, immediate action was required." "What kind of action?" "Vanessa's employment has been terminated, effective immediately. We've issued a formal cease and desist order on all activities related to Prisma Systems, and we're prepared to offer a settlement that includes financial compensation and a 5-year non-compete agreement in your market segment." Marcus considered this carefully. "Why come to me directly? Why not go through legal channels?" Chen's expression shifted to something like reluctant respect. "Because our legal team has reviewed the evidence you've gathered. It's comprehensive. A public legal battle would be catastrophic for Helix, regardless of the eventual outcome." "And you're hoping I can influence our board toward accepting a private settlement?" "Yes," Chen acknowledged. "Your reputation for balanced judgment preceded this situation. Recent events have only reinforced it." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll present your offer to our board and legal team. I can't promise an outcome, but I can promise fair consideration." "That's all I'm asking," Chen replied, visibly relieved. He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about the personal dimensions of this situation. That was never part of our corporate strategy." "I believe you," Marcus said, mildly surprised to discover he meant it. The board meeting was convened 48 hours later as scheduled. Janet presented the evidence regarding Helix's cyber attack. Carla outlined the proposed settlement terms, and Marcus delivered a comprehensive analysis of the entire situation. Professionally detailed, emotionally measured, strategically sound. When he finished, the boardroom remained silent for several moments until Chairman Wallace leaned forward, removing his glasses with deliberate care. "In 30 years of corporate governance, I've never seen a crisis managed with such clarity and precision," he stated, "particularly one with such complex personal entanglements. The board is unanimously impressed not just with the outcome, but with the process that led to it." Marcus nodded in acknowledgement, waiting. "We've already voted," Wallace continued. "The Helix settlement will be accepted with the modifications Ms. Reeves suggested, and your appointment as Vice President of Product is confirmed, effective immediately." A ripple of congratulatory murmurs circled the table. Marcus accepted them with quiet gratitude, but his mind was already moving forward to implementation details, transition plans, strategic initiatives that would now fall under his expanded responsibility. As the meeting concluded and executives filtered out of the boardroom, Chairman Wallace held Marcus back with a light touch on his elbow. "One more thing," the older man said once they were alone. "A personal observation, if you'll permit it." "Of course." Wallace studied him thoughtfully. "I've seen many promising careers derailed by personal crises. Divorce, health issues, family problems. Life has a way of intruding on a professional trajectory. But I've rarely seen someone navigate such turbulent waters with such steady composure." "I had excellent guidance," Marcus replied simply. "Dr. Mercer?" Wallace asked, surprising Marcus with his awareness of the details. "Yes, how did you—" "Janet mentioned it," Wallace explained. "Not the specifics, just that you'd worked with Mercer on leadership principles that proved remarkably effective with your team." Marcus nodded, understanding dawning. "And now you're wondering if those principles could be applied more broadly within the organization." Wallace's eyes crinkled with appreciation. "Precisely. We have no shortage of brilliant individuals who struggle with the interpersonal dimensions of leadership. If there's a systematic approach that could address that gap, There is, Marcus confirmed. It's not a quick fix or a simple formula, but a practical framework for developing clarity, clear boundaries, emotional regulation, and balanced accountability. He paused, considering. I'd be happy to work with HR on adapting the core principles for broader application. Excellent, Wallace said, extending his hand. I look forward to seeing what you accomplish in this new role, Marcus. Not just with products, but with people. 3 months later, Marcus stood at his office window, no longer the sparsely furnished apartment of his post-separation days, but a warm, intentionally designed space that reflected his evolved sense of self. Outside, summer sunshine transformed the city skyline into a gleaming landscape of possibility. On his desk sat 3 items of significance: the wooden box containing Dr. Mercer's symbols, a framed photograph of the Prisma team celebrating their latest successful release, and a formal invitation to speak at the upcoming Leadership Summit on balanced accountability, transforming teams through clarity and consequence. His phone vibrated with an incoming message, not from Janet or the team, but from Dr. Mercer herself. Saw your name on the summit speaker list. Full circle moment. Available for preparation session if needed, but suspect you've internalized the principles completely now. Proud of your journey. Marcus smiled, composing a reply that captured his genuine gratitude without excessive sentiment. The tools you provided constructed an entirely new framework for navigating life's most challenging games. Would welcome a refresher session, not because it's needed, but because wisdom deepens through continued conversation. As he sent the message, his assistant knocked lightly on the doorframe. Your 4 o'clock is here, and Janet asked me to remind you about dinner with the team at Castellino's at 7. Thank you, Sarah, Marcus replied, gathering the materials for his next meeting, a strategic planning session for the company's most ambitious product initiative. The past year had reshaped everything. His marriage ended, his career transformed, and his understanding of human dynamics fundamentally altered. Yet through it all, the principles remained constant. Clear boundaries that protected without isolating, emotional regulation that acknowledged feelings without being controlled by them, and balanced consequences that held others accountable without punitive excess. These weren't just strategies for managing difficult personalities anymore. They had become the architecture of a life built on clarity, purpose, and genuine connection. As Marcus moved toward the conference room where his team waited, he carried with him not just expertise and authority, but something far more valuable. This hard-won wisdom comes in the crucible, from facing life's most challenging opponents and discovering that the most significant victories aren't won against others, but by expanding your capability. The game continued as it always did. New opponents, challenges, and complexities would emerge without fail. But Marcus no longer feared the contest. He welcomed it, knowing that with each engagement, his mastery deepened, his vision cleared, and his capacity for balanced response grew stronger. With eyes wide open courage, Marcus stepped into the conference room, ready for the next match to begin. Not as a reluctant participant, but as a confident competitor who understood that life's most rewarding victories came not from dominating others, but from mastering yourself. You've been listening to the audiobook The Change Game, written by Quinn Price and narrated by Mark Silverberg, published by the Change Capability Press. Thanks for joining us.